Welcome into the Hot Read podcast for Tuesday, May the 2nd. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, director of published content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network, and I'm joined as always by producer JT. JT, the last 3 months of our lives culminated this past weekend in the draft. Do you feel depressed? Do you feel relieved? Do you feel rejuvenated that we have something new to talk about finally? What are your thoughts after this past weekend?
Um, Honestly, yeah, a little depressed. Like everything's just over in an instant like that. But also, it's probably because
Like, what do I do now?
I'm
What
very, very tired still.
Sure.
Like
Yeah,
I,
I'm
I
with
feel
you.
like I'm gonna fall asleep. I'm still not recovered from 11 hours at LaGuardia Airport. But we're getting there.
Yeah, so there's
Slowly
a
but
number
surely.
of reasons why we ended up doing this show today and not yesterday. And the main one was JT calls me on the weekend and he's like, "Hey, I'm up here for New. You went to New York for to do a number of things, among them to see the Mets lose to the Braves in the rain, which seemed like
Yeah,
a lot of fun.
it was a lot of fun.
Um, you also got to see our collegiate a cappella group perform on Broadway, which was kind of sick. They won
And
finals,
win.
best a cappella group in the world for the next
We
year.
are.
Not
Yeah.
small flex. Random, I know, on a sports show, but here we are to talk about the Titans, and it's our full debrief of the draft. And JT, I've never been more daunted entering a show to just boil down all of my thoughts into an hour or so. Like, there's just so many different ways we can go about this. And I woke up this morning thinking, you know what? We've got all summer to talk about this. There's no point in trying to shove it all into one show. So let's kind of just do an overview and then we can break it down further. We will break it down further. I mentioned on yesterday's show, which if folks didn't tune in last night, we did a cut up of all of the best moments from the NFL draft live broadcast we did over the weekend, which hundreds, maybe thousands of you tuned into. I've lost count at this point. Thank you so much for joining us on those live broadcasts. It was a ton of fun watching the first two rounds with you guys, me and JT and Stoney Keeley over at Sobros Network, who, again, a huge thank you to him for joining us. He is the best. If you don't follow him or patronize his work, you're doing Titans fandom wrong. So please go and do that. He is awesome. Thank you, Caleb. This is going to be a very Easton heavy episode because I've got a lot of thoughts. And I love you too, son. If those of you that are in the chat have any questions, by the way, today we are doing another installment of one of our favorite segments, JT. It's fake questions, real answers. We are too lazy, or maybe we just don't trust people to write in the right questions that we want to answer. So we just write them ourselves. We pretend that we are the people that we are asking for submissions for a mailbag. We submit our own mailbag questions and answer the questions that we think you want answered anyways, but we want to talk about. And so we've got 10. I have narrowed it down to 10 questions today that address every element of the Titans draft that we are going to get into. And at the end of the show, if anybody has any questions that they want to submit that we haven't covered, then please, in the chat over at Broadway Sports Media on YouTube, you find this live stream. And in the comment section of that live stream on YouTube, you can leave comments that we can see here on our interface and we can throw up on the board. And at the end, we'll be happy to answer any and all of them. If you are listening live, please do us a favor, retweet, like, share, send the link to a friend. Very helpful to get as many folks in here as possible. Of course, this will come out as a podcast shortly after we are done live streaming, but we would love to have as many questions from live viewers as possible. And we're not ignoring you, I promise. Just send your question in and then be patient. At the end, we will get to all of them. So before we do, JT, a little bit of housekeeping on the draft in general. And we're going to talk about the Titans in particular today. We're not going to dive into the myriad other things that we have draft related to talk about because, we covered the draft for the past 3 months or so from a bit of an agnostic standpoint, just covering the draft as a whole with a Titans slant, right? From a Titans point of view. So we're kind of got a foot in both doors here. And there's a ton of things that happened during the draft that weren't Titans related that I want to dive into eventually. But today it's just Titans. In the near future, when we have on Danny Kelly, who I have mentioned at the end of yesterday's show, Danny Kelly of The Ringer puts together one of the 4 or 5 most popular, biggest, most important, most trusted draft guides in the whole world. He is awesome. We met him in Indianapolis. He grabbed an Uber with us. We got him a drink and we said, "Hey man, you want to pay us back? Come on the show. We would love to have you." And he said, "Let's do it." So we're going to do that and react to all of the craziness that went on in the draft that may or may not have to do with the Titans in a future episode. But just to get a couple of non-Titans things out there, JT, is there any victory laps we need to take on the draft? Or are there any scout thyself moments that we need to take accountability for? I wrote down a couple of things where I was right and wrong in terms of predictions. I was right that 3 or 4 wide receivers were going in the first round. People were thinking it'd be 1, maybe 2. I called that one. I called Joey Porter Jr. falling out of the first round. I said that watch out, this could happen. I also called Paris Johnson Jr. not getting anywhere near the 11th overall pick, so Titans fans can quit crying about that. We can throw it all the way back to that tweet I sent in January where I was like, every Titans fan in the world wants Paris Johnson Jr., and it's just too perfect to be real. There's no way this early there's a consensus that makes so much sense, so it's not going to be him. He's not going to be there, and here we are. He was not there, not even close. And then finally, Will McDonald, the 4th, my boy, bona fide first-round pick. I kept hyping him up as a first-rounder, and he goes way earlier than I ever even gave him credit for. He goes to the Jets at like 14, 15 overall. So those were the things I got right, as well as, by the way, as I had appropriately vaguely said all along, the Titans are taking a University of Tennessee receiver, baby. Colton Dowell, UTC, 7th rounder. Never in doubt. We'll talk about him later on. A couple of things I was wrong about. I did think there was no way Will Levis falls out of the first round. Clearly wrong about that. Although clearly there were a lot of teams that wanted to come back into the first round to get him and failed to do so. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we kept trying to figure out, JT, who's going to be the rando, the surprise that shows up in the first round that no one expects. And we kept saying, watch out for Kalijah Cansey, or watch out for Keanu Benton. Doesn't quite go in the first, but does get drafted high. And that is something that I was wrong about. JT, were there any things that there were 2 big Iowa boys in the first round that you were right about. We know that much.
I kind of have to take a home run lap on the Jack Campbell here. Now, he didn't go as far as high as I projected him, which was been an ongoing thing between me and Zach Lyons, where Jack Campbell was going number 1 overall. But
yeah, he was.
Only going 17 picks later, I think is still a home run swing in the grand scheme
yes.
of everyone. I think most people at the start of the draft, like right when the clock started, most people's idea of where Jack Campbell was going was probably a late second. He kind of lost his draft stock, but not for me, baby. And me and Dan Campbell, we think alike, because Jack Campbell goes in the first round.
It was shocking in the moment, but if I told you Jack Campbell ends up with Dan Campbell at the end, first of all, I'm not sure they're not related. I'm assuming they're not related. Who knows? Maybe that would explain why he went so high. But if I told you that, you'd have been like, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense that Dan Campbell is a Jack Campbell guy.
And I think the only thing that my loss of the week is that the Titans did draft one of my guys that I said do not draft. So now
that's true.
Now begins the 6-month sell me on Josh Wiley. Like, sell me on him, because I'm still not the biggest fan of him. People love to send me clips of him making one-handed catches in college, and it's basically the same clip, like over and over again. I'm like, all right, let me see you do it on the field. So sure. It's exciting to be past the draft now, and it's all right. All right, what does Rand and Mike Vrabel know? Prove me wrong. Let's see.
Well, and when we get to Josh Wiley in a little bit, we'll talk about that. We'll probably pull up the article and have you read what you wrote about him in the draft guide. Our do and don't draft players for the NFL draft for the Titans. That draft got to be put out last week before the draft. I think we went 2-2 on there. We said do draft Peter Skoronski. We said do draft Jalen Duncan. We said don't draft Josh Wiley, and we said don't draft Will Levis. Although, to be fair with Will Levis, that don't draft was at the first round.
The first round.
It changes the math entirely when you get him in the second round.
Maybe like 2 and 1.5 is what I reckon.
Yeah. We're like 2-1-1. We'll call it 2-1-1.
That's high.
Which is a horrible record when you wrote 70. But you know what? There's so many draftable players that you have to write 70 to even nail 4 of them. And I'll take it. The other thing that is not NFL related, but I have to give you a victory lap here on, is JT, when I have children in the near future, and they are old enough to comprehend this, my first lesson I'm going to teach them is never, ever, under any circumstances, win the President's Trophy.
Yes, right? There you go.
Which is something that you called from the beginning of the NHL season, that the Boston Bruins were frauds. I said, I don't think so. You deserve a victory lap on that one, because they are dead in the first round.
I did say it, and give me some credit. I was thinking about writing an article, but with everything going on with the draft, I just couldn't get around to it. But I was going to rank all of the playoff teams going into it. Boston Bruins were outside my top 5, man. And from this time, I knew I probably would have got heat for that. I knew, and I've been saying it all year, that they're frauds. And of course, their goalie gets hurt. They did not look good in that last game, and it makes sense of why they lost. I mean, I just thought they were frauds from the get-go.
It's so weird because in the NBA and the MLB, when you also get 7-game series in the playoffs, like typically those series, you get the law of averages. You may have an upset here or there, but the better team typically wins. Like that's kind of the point of it. Not like in the NFL where it's an any given Sunday thing in the playoffs, which I prefer, but some folks prefer the 7-game series. In the NHL, it's kind of both. Like you get 7 games, but also it's really random and it makes it super exciting. We've already got the President's Trophy winner, Boston Bruins, gone. We've got the defending champion Avalanche gone. We've got your dynasty Tampa Bay Lightning already dead. Like, who is left in this playoffs that you like? Who's the favorite that's left? Who do you think is going to win it all at this point?
That's hard. I probably would say, yeah. I think the Oilers have a really good shot this year, man. I think it's Connor McDavid's year. I think this is the best chance a Canadian team has had to win, and they haven't won in 27 years. So if there's any year,
is it supposed to be their sport?
Yeah, right.
Uh-huh.
Anyways, let's talk about our sport.
Let's talk about football. All right, so we're getting into the main segment today, which is fake questions, real answers. We've done this 2-3 times before, and I've really enjoyed it because it is basically a mailbag that we don't have to put in the effort to ask you all to submit the questions. When we get to save you all the effort of trying to come up with the questions. So it is a mailbag segment, fake questions that we come up with. We are too lazy to ask you all to submit them, so we ask ourselves them. We've got 10 that we are going to cover today that I think cover every broad spectrum area of the Titans draft. We'll kind of cover every player, draft philosophy, what we've learned, what the vision for this team is going forward. And JT, I think that's the biggest question mark a lot of more casual fans have right now. On the surface, at very shallow level, the Titans draft seems kind of confusing at first, I think, to a lot of fans, and they don't quite know where Rand Carthon and Mike Vrabel are taking this team. But I, for one, and I don't know if you share this, but I, for one, after the draft is behind us now, and we've heard from these players, we've heard from the coaches and the GM, I think it's really clear where their vision is going forward. And so we'll get to that. But not one last time, we'll mention it throughout the show. If you have any questions and you're tuning in live that you want to ask that we don't get to, we're going to cover them all at the end of these 10 questions we want to address first. So please, in the chat over at Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page, go to the comment section of this live stream and leave any and all questions you have about the Titans, the NFL, the draft, what life, whatever you want. Cooking. We probably don't have any answers, but we'll try. We would love your questions. And sure, yeah, you're better cook than I am. So we would love those questions, and please leave them over there. And we promise we're not ignoring you in the chat. We're going to get to it all at the end of our questions. And so, JT, without further ado, let's get to our first question. Who is our first question from, and what do they want to know?
Yeah, so our first question comes from @JumpinJeremy07. He writes in from Saudi Daisy, and it looks like his profile picture is he's a professional skydiver, and he writes in here.
Incredible. Yeah.
Now that the draft is over, Easton, can you give us a 10,000 foot view of the NFL draft?
I can, and I have a lot of thoughts. I was asked this on Twitter yesterday about just what my thoughts were on the subject, what my thoughts were on the draft coming out. The number one thing from a Titans specific perspective, Mike Vrabel sure seemed a little bit happier this year as the draft went on and how things had been going in the draft than he did in past years. JT, did you kind of get that vibe that he was enjoying himself a little bit with the waves at the camera, cutting up, smiling a lot more than folks are used to seeing him smile? He was having a good time.
Yeah, I mean, you come back to that video of him and Rand just basically trolling everyone, being like, nope, we're going to pass once again on a wide receiver. We're going to keep going. But clearly he got his plan, he got his way, and he seems pretty happy with the pieces he has at the moment. And I think it was just a more successful and maybe even less stressful draft for him, for sure.
Yeah, another thing that I want to mention, and I'm pulling up, the one thing I forgot to prepare here is finding the notes that I've written down. So I'm finding them as I go. But the other thing that I wanted to mention before I get to those is this is an interesting one for the Titans. They go all offense in this draft, which, if you just told people that going in, they'd probably be really happy because they were afraid Mike Vrabel would it'd be impossible for him to go through a draft without getting a defender. 6 picks, 6 offensive players, no wide receivers, and that's the big rub that we'll get to later on. But they do go all offense, and it's kind of a funny way this team has gone about building. Obviously, this wasn't the plan from the get-go, but the Titans spent an entire offseason in 2020, just a couple of seasons ago, focusing almost entirely on the defense. It was coming off of the 2019 season where Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry and Corey Davis and A.J. Brown, all of those guys had the offense in the back half of the season had been the most explosive, best offense in the entire league. And the defense had been a disaster. And so instead of firing the DC and revamping the coaching staff, they made their bet on we need to upgrade personnel and we need to upgrade bad. They do that in free agency, in making trades, in the draft. They did a lot of work to revamp that defensive personnel. And it's something that worked out really well for them, right? They almost immediately came a much better defensive front. You had Jeffrey Simmons amongst other players who come in and add a lot to that offense, or to that defense rather. And it worked very quickly. Well, now in 2023, the Titans are the only team in the entire league that spent all of their draft capital on offense. They spent the third most capital on offense in the league, only bested by the Panthers and the Texans, who both had roughly 700,000 draft picks each. The Titans, with only 6, spend all 6 on offense. The Colts, by the way, spent a lot on offense as well, but they had a ton of picks they spent on defense too. It's interesting that we've now got 3 years later, the same thing but flipped. The Titans focused on the offensive side of the ball, and mostly offense and free agency too, right? I mean, they signed Sean Murphy-Bunting to the secondary on the defense, but beyond that, it's mostly offensive linemen, and they bring in a tight end. So it's going to be interesting to see if that's something that this team becomes a lot better at in a hurry. Will this offense get a lot better in a hurry? We will see. Another thing that we learned, JT, about this process for the Titans is, and we had a hint about this during free agency, Ran Carthon and Mike Vrabel, and I would say probably more Ran Carthon because he's the biggest change here. They are RAS guys. They are athletic player guys. They want guys that are athletes. They want guys that are freaky, testing athletic profile guys. Obviously, they want guys that are good players too, but they focus in on the freak athletes. From this draft alone, you've got Pierre Skoronski, who had an RAS, a relative athletic score of 9.3. Will Levis didn't test, so we don't know, although if he had tested, it would have been a high number just based on what we know from his past testing and watching the tape. Running back Tyjae Spears, a 7.51, which is kind of surprisingly low. When you watch him on tape, he looks like a much freakier athlete than that. Tight end Josh Wiley, an 8.98. Lineman Jalen Duncan, 9.01. And wide receiver Colton Dowell, a 9.78. So this is a team that love their athletic freaks. And they also love, JT, drafting at BPA. Now, we talked about this at length during the draft broadcasts. What will we find out about the way that Ran Carthon approaches the draft? There are 2 ways to approach the draft, right? You can go BPA, which stands for best player available. Some folks, a lot of nerds in particular, will say, hey, you shouldn't be drafting for need. You should focus on need in free agency and then just draft the best player on your board. And that, it makes sense. So you're maximizing your value regardless of the needs that you might have, trying to fill spots on your roster. That is typically how you get yourself into trouble in terms of value picks. There's also the flip side of that coin, drafting for need. If you need an offensive lineman, if you need a tackle 2, if you need a wide receiver of any kind, like the Titans did, you could draft for need and take the best player on your board at the position that you're trying to target. But that's giving up ultimately value because you're not taking the best player at your disposal. Every GM in the league has some balance of these two things. Nobody is all BPA, all draft for need. They fall somewhere in the middle. It's a spectrum. The question is, are you 50-50? Are you 75-25 one way or the other? With Ran Carthon, JT, and maybe you disagree, I feel like we have figured out he is a 75% guy. Give me the BPA. Give me the best player available. That's how the draft board seems to fall.
Yeah, I'm like, I think for a couple of them, especially with their picks, there's like a couple, like I think the third pick with Tyjae Spears is one that might be more of not exactly best player available, but they just really liked him. And I don't think he was going to be there maybe in the 5th round. And of course, it just kind of hurts you with that one when they don't have a 4th round pick. So besides that, I think they definitely did go BPA.
Yeah, all right. Thank you for vamping just long enough for me to find these notes. So here's what I wrote when I was asked yesterday to boil down my thoughts on this draft. All offense, thumbs up, right? And then I said a number of players I liked a lot in the scouting process that I'm surprised the Titans chose for this team at this moment, as they're taking the team in a direction different than I had in mind going in. But I think I understand that direction now. We'll talk about that in a moment. Nearly every pick was of great value. So that's a thumbs up in my opinion. Their young offensive line, I think, is going to get a lot better in a hurry. We'll talk about that later. They clearly were out on this wide receiver class, JT. That was the number one surprise. I mean, and it's not surprising in hindsight, but people were expecting them to at least take a swing at a receiver of some value. They ended up going with Colton Dowell in the 7th, who is probably going to be a practice squad guy, but could prove us wrong. I was surprised by how out they were on this wide receiver class. They, I understand it in general because this was a more down receiver class in the past couple that we've had, but I had a number of receivers in rounds like 3 through 6 that I liked better than clearly the Titans did, and liked better than a couple of the picks that they ended up making that I thought were worth taking a flyer on, but clearly the Titans and I disagree. Ultimately, I can't give them a hard time for beginning this rebuild, retool, reset by addressing the trenches first and working from there. That seems to be the football 101 logical way to approach team building. So I understand that. And then their vision for this team for the next 2 or so years is a lot clearer to me now, even though it was different than what I had expected or what I would have done personally. The approach makes a ton of sense to me, and I don't take issue with it. I'm also extremely interested in seeing, and this is the next point I'm going to make, I'm interested in seeing this team and these players play so I can base my opinion on this draft off of tangible results. And that's the next point here, JT. The number one dumbest thing that I think you can do in the offseason is, definitively judging a GM on their draft performance in April, in May, in June or July. It's all projections, predictions, opinions. It's all a guessing game until the players, play. Like until the players touch grass and put a jersey on, it's all based on opinions. We don't have tangible results to base these judgments on. So, I guess folks can keep those "I've lost faith in fire Ran, I miss John Robinson" tweets flowing, because it makes for awesome ammo to make you look like a moron in like a year or two if things work out. Because we do not know. We simply do not know. And a great indicator that was floating around the internet this past weekend was one of the many draft reports that were done on Patrick Mahomes when he was drafted. And this draft report had Patrick Mahomes, went 10th overall out of Texas Tech, to the Kansas City Chiefs. Grade C-. The analysis is calling Mahomes a project is a major understatement. He's nowhere near ready to play in the NFL, and honestly, he may never be. Between his inconsistency, poor accuracy due to poor mechanics, his tendency to bail from clean pockets, and his lack of field vision, he's going to leave as many big plays on the field as he creates. This was a risky pick. We all know how that turned out. Now, is that to say Will Levis is going to become Patrick Mahomes? No, I'm not saying that. There's a 99% chance he does not. But we don't know how these things work. And we won't know until we see them play. Shout out Stoney, I'm assuming, from the Sobos Network. The Fire Ran crowd could stand to go actually touch grass. Yeah, Fire Ran crowd, please touch grass. I'm begging you. Get off the internet. And some fans, some fans are just determined to be upset no matter what. Like I was talking to somebody on Twitter about how, this is the franchise, this is the fan base rather, that has been dying for 2 years, JT. Please take a swing on a quarterback. Please take a swing on a guy that could become a franchise player. And by any definition, Will Levis, a top 4 player in this draft, by any account, a first round grade, according to 95% of the draft analysts you're going to find out there. They go and do that. And then it's like, well, no, not that guy, not that one. And then we hear in the 24 hours leading up to the draft, the Titans may be in love with Zay Flowers. They may be interested in Zay Flowers. We don't know. First round, maybe at 11, maybe a trade back. And Titans fans who have been desperate and now are still desperate for a wide receiver were like, no, absolutely not. I hate Zay Flowers. Terrible value. Do not draft Zay Flowers. So these folks aren't going to be happy no matter what. They're determined to find flaws and to be upset. And it's funny how the roles have kind of reversed this year, JT. My last point on this topic is every year it feels like the Titans put together a draft class where, all of the draft graders from the national media in the aftermath of the draft say, there you go. Titans with a mediocre draft class, underwhelming, made a lot of reaches, D+ at best. And Titans fans are like, what are you talking about, man? This is like an A- B+ draft. We love this draft. And now this year you've got fans wanting to literally burn jerseys. And every draft analyst nationally is like, hey, look at the Titans, baby. All right. Value rebuild. Yeah, right here. I mean, I literally found these two things and quote tweeted them. PFF giving the Titans one of 4 A grades on their draft. Meanwhile, there are Titans fans, volunteer fans, who are literally burning their Titans jerseys and putting it on Twitter, which is the most childish thing that I think anyone can do in sports. And so it is foolish. It is silly. And all these same people, if things work out in 6 months, will be big fans and will say, never in doubt, and randomly trust. So that's just the way that things go. Let's get to our next question.
Yeah, our next question here on Fake Questions, Real Answers comes from at Zalar the Fortune Teller, who comes from the great mysterious land of Hendersonville. He's gonna come in here with a question and say, I usually can really predict the future, but I'm having some cloudy vision here. Easton, What is the vision for this team going forward?
It's a great question. It's one that I think maybe the number one question on the average Titans fan mind right now. What was the point of this draft? What are Rand and Vrabel cooking up in there? What are they building in there? Right? Like what are the plans for this team in the next year or two? It's a redux of what the Titans attempted to do last year, in my opinion. I think it's very clearly a 2 to 3 year soft reset, competitive rebuild, whatever you want to call it, JT. But this team clearly, I think from the top has decided, you know what, we've got some guys who we think still have some juice. Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill, maybe Kevin Byard, even maybe a guy that maybe not too long for the Titans. We don't know yet with this contract situation. Danico Autry, like we've got some dudes with some real juice. We've got some stars that we think can, if the stars align, put it together and make a run. And we've just decided we don't want to do we don't want to tear it all the way down. We want to reset all the way. So what we're going to do is a lot of these contracts where we either have an out or they are up. They are run out at the end of this next season. So we're going to let those contracts run their course. We're going to keep these guys around. We're going to see what we can do this year with the last vestige of the old guard. And then going forward, it's going to be the Peter Skoronski, Will Levis, Tyjae Spears show around here. And the defense may stay a lot of the same, but the offense, we're going to have a new era of Titans football next year. And then, maybe that year is the year before the year. Maybe that's a year away from being a true contender. And then in 2025, that's the year that they go all in with the second year Will Levis, if he's panning out. The offensive line, they've really shored up by then. They've got some young guys that have a couple of years under their belt. You got Tyjae Spears, if he's still healthy and trucking along like we think he can be, is a great running element. And the wide receiver game, this year's wide receiver options rather in free agency and in the draft, like it was a down year. There weren't a whole lot of options, and the Titans decided we're not going to reach. We're not going to be the team that goes out and desperately claws for receivers when we think that they're not of good value. So next year, I'd imagine that's probably when they're going to address that. Really, really good wide receiver class, it looks like, in the draft. We'll see this year. Free agency, significantly better, which would be hard to do because this year's free agency was so aggressively bad. But that seems to be where this team is headed. JT, do you kind of see that as their vision, or do you disagree?
After the draft, for sure. Not
right.
Like, especially going out and not taking a wide receiver till the 7th round kind of tells me that that's where their vision's going here.
Right.
And I mean, you're right. Like, definitely with the cap space that they have next year with
$150 million or something.
I mean, yeah, and with the free agency class that is coming up here, I just pulled it up right here. You have guys like Mike Evans, Odell Beckham. You'll have a Tyler Boyd. You'll have Corey Davis coming off that contract, so you won't have to deal with him. Just like some of these guys here in this class might be really worth it. You might have Hollywood Brown coming off that contract. Calvin Ridley, Michael Pittman Jr. If they can't get a deal done,
it's a lot of really good players.
They can't get a deal done.
Yeah,
like there will be a lot of assets that you can go out and use a lot of that capital with next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's their plan. And they came into this year, JT, with 2 major needs. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more later. But they came up with 2 major needs, wide receiver and offensive line. And they clearly chose to spend their limited capital on offensive line. They bring in 2 new guys in free agency who are probably going to start. They bring in 2 new guys in the draft, one of which is definitely going to be a day 1 starter and one of which is going to be a really nice depth piece we'll talk about later in Jalen Duncan. So they chose to go offensive line. And we'll talk about this in a bit. upgrading your offensive line is a sneaky great way to make your offense really good in a hurry. Like it's one of the, maybe the best way to get a lot better in a hurry to improve the line. And so we'll talk about that. But first, let's get to our next question. Our first question on a specific player in this year's draft.
Yeah, so this one comes from at Big Boy Feed, who hails from Sneedville. So a little
Feed
bit
from
of
Sneed. How
Feed from
about it?
Sneed. Maybe a little Dr. Seuss there going on. He says, isn't Skoronski supposed to be a guard?
Yeah, so that's the big rub with Peter Skoronski. At the 11th overall pick, the Titans take Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern. And with each of the individual players the Titans drafted, we're going to spend the time today to get as educated as possible from who I think is the best source on these things possible. Now, of course, there are a number of different national folks that, PFF, the Mike Renners, you can go and check out Danny Kelly over at The Ringer that did a lot of really good scouting, did a lot of really good reporting and analysis on these players. But Dane Brugler at The Athletic is the best for my money. He puts together the beast every year. It's the only draft guide out there where you're going to find every single player in the draft. He has thousands of players in there and manages to get information on all of them. And so for each of these players the Titans got, I'm going to read verbatim his summary write-up on these players so that we can kind of get a baseline. So for Peter Skoronski, he wrote strengths: thick, wide frame with a powerful core, explodes out of his stance with quick, confident feet, stays balanced in his pass sets to consistently reposition against pass rushers, recovers well versus cross-face rushers because of his recognition and body control, deploys a stiff, fierce punch, stays patient with his handwork and pass pro to slap away the reach of rushers or catch their hands or wrists, processes things very well and does a great job answering whatever rushers throw at him. Northwestern defensive lineman Adetamiwa Adeboare said, going against that kind of guy every day in practice, it's like I'm playing chess. Excellent movement as a run blocker to short pull, long pull, or trap. Above average play strength, and he uses his body positioning to drive his blocks. Clamps down with his hands once he makes contact to control the point of attack. Outstanding finisher without sacrificing his balance. Very smart on and off the field. Finishes in the top 1% of his graduating class in high school. Voted a 2022 team captain. NFL scouts called his work ethic elite, and his coaches describe him as a humble and not self-promoting kind of person. Started every game at left tackle for the Wildcats over the last 3 seasons. His weaknesses: doesn't have desired measurements for offensive tackle, including short arms. That's the rub, obviously. Long-armed defenders consistently make first contact and enter his frame. Needs to improve his strike timing to protect his chest and breastplate. Occasionally struggles to sit down versus bull rushers who have a few steps of momentum. Penalized a career high 5 times last season, 3 false starts and 2 holds. Only played left tackle in college, played some guard in high school, but doesn't have any center experience aside from practice. Now the summary: a 3-year starter at Northwestern, Skoronski was inserted at left tackle as a true freshman after Rashawn Slater, pretty good NFL player, opted out of the 2022 season and started every game in offense in offensive coordinator Mike Bajakian's run-based scheme. He had a dominant 2022 season as the only offensive tackle in college football with 830 plus snaps and 6 or fewer pressures allowed. I'm going to repeat that. 830 plus snaps at tackle, where you all say he can't play, with only 6 pressures allowed, becoming both the first unanimous All-American and first winner of the Big Ten's Rington Pace Offensive Lineman of the Year in school history. As both a pass blocker and a run blocker, Skoronski is quick off the ball and does a great job keeping blocks centered, sustained, and rarely in compromising positions. Although his lack of ideal size shows versus long, powerful rushers, he takes pride in mastering the details, which allows him to default to his technique and make up for deficiencies. Overall, Skoronski falls below the arm length threshold to stay at tackle for several NFL teams, but he's a technician with impressive balance and strength to reposition his hands and feet mid-engagement. Though he should get a chance to stay outside in the NFL, he's an immediate NFL starter inside at guard or center with a Pro Bowl ceiling. And his grade was first round grade, 7th overall on Dane Brugler's big board. Again, that's Dane Brugler from The Athletic, who does fantastic work. This, JT, was Ran Carthen, a brand new GM in the league, choosing to hit a double. And we talked about this in an episode leading up to the draft. When you're a new GM, a lot of GMs would tell you, hey, don't try to hit a home run on your first ever draft pick. Okay? Hit a double. Make sure it's a safe double. Get a guy that is going to be a winner, but you don't necessarily go for the big fish in the pond that is a massive risk reward. You go for a guy that is safe. And that is exactly what Rankarthen did. A Twitter account called Dern Sharts, which is hilarious that they'd make such a good point. But they did. They tweeted at me and said, sometimes a double drives in 3 runs, baby. And that can't hit the nail on the head any more square, in my opinion. That is the perfect way of putting it. Skoronski is no home run, for sure. But a brand new GM isn't looking for a home run. He wants a double. Skoronski is the double of all doubles in this draft class. He absolutely sends 3 runs home. And those 3 runs, JT, are every single skill player on the Titans roster. The ceiling for all of the skill players increases by the forced multiplication of this one player. And we talked about this at length on the show on Thursday night. I really, really think that this guy, even if they play him at guard, and listen, I still maintain that he is worth giving a chance at tackle. Do I think the Titans will play him at tackle? No. Ultimately, I think we may never get the chance to find out whether he can be a tackle or not, because they're probably going to choose to, at least at first, play him at guard. Now, we know that with the current assumptive left tackle, Andre Dillard, he's on a pretty short contract, a contract the team can get out of after a year or two should they want to. And if he is a disaster in camp, I'm sure that the next guy up for that left tackle spot will be Peter Skoronski. I can also tell you this. If Peter Skoronski plays at guard and Andre Dillard goes down and misses 3 to 4 weeks, you've now got a guy, unlike Dennis Daly, the ultimate opposite of Dennis Daly, who can step in for 4 or 5 games at left tackle, and you're confident that the offensive line may not skip a beat. He may not lose a step and really be a serviceable, above average fill in at left tackle. May even be the way that he ends up getting to left tackle in his career. Maybe he gets a chance there and proves himself in live reps in a game. And that's just the way that it works for him. But I think that this was a perfect double. JT, do you agree that this was a maybe the safest possible pick he could have made in the first round?
Considering where all the value was, it's my favorite pick he could have made. Like JSN would have been nice, but seeing that he fell as far as he did, I get the injury
the
concerns.
whole NFL didn't value him that way, I think.
But having Peter Skoronski there, in my book, is still a home run, but that's just kind of how I see it. In the grand scheme of things, it is a double because it does so much for you, shores up a lot of the problems that they had last season, and fixes those in an instant. So I think you just get to reap the benefits of that, getting a smart, safe pick.
Completely agree. Let's get to our next question.
Yeah, so our next question comes in from at NWI Truther 906, who is from Pigeon Forge. And he must really be a truther because those last 3 numbers are how many yards NWI has in his career. So he must really love NWI here. But he writes in and says, why so focused on offensive line? What about the receivers?
Yeah, and this was the main issue for many Titans fans in this draft. You're cool. You got offensive linemen, not sexy, but you got to have them. Makes sense. Got to win in the trenches. Where are the receivers? This receiver room is the worst in the league. We're so upset. Why aren't they getting receivers? On this topic, okay, this was, and I mentioned this earlier, but the Titans came into this offseason with limited cap space and limited draft capital, and they had 2 massive positions of need. They needed wide receivers, and they needed offensive linemen. They chose to put all of those capital eggs in the offensive lineman basket. Now we'll see how that works out, but I would say, based on, again, NFL team building 101, starting in the trenches, because you do in fact still win in the trenches in the NFL, is the correct way to go. You build out your offensive line, you establish a foundation. It's like building your house on the sand to skip over the offensive line. We've seen that the past 2 years, the Titans either neglecting or failing with their replacements in the offensive line. Suddenly the foundation of your house is crumbling and you can have studs. It does not matter. Derrick Henry can't get 2 steps before he gets first contact. Traylon Burks and Chigakonkwo can't get 7 yards down the field before Ryan Tannehill is getting his head lopped off. When you have an offensive line, it opens up a lot of possibilities for your team. But on the topic of this, I completely understand the disappointment with the Titans wide receiver room. It is disappointing for sure. It's a problem. There's nobody in the world that says this wide receiver room is cool. It is a serviceable NFL receiver room. We don't want to add anything to it. Okay. No one thinks that. But when you consider how they had such limited options this offseason, I just don't understand how any reasonable person can't understand choosing to prioritize the trenches, especially after the last 2 seasons of offensive line play, and especially considering the fact that this year's free agency class and the wide receiver draft pool were down by any historical metric. Do you, JT, understand them going with offensive line, or do you think that they should have prioritized wide receiver more than they did?
I mean, I totally after, and you kind of see why they did that. I mean, we both agree that this class was really not what exactly they were looking for. There wasn't a lot of where they picked, at least past this first 2 rounds. There wasn't a lot of value for compliments to a Treylon Burks or whatever else they had. And being able to shore up that offensive line here and being able to actually see giving Ryan Tannehill time in the pocket to let the plays develop, maybe you'll be able to see a little bit more production out of Treylon Burks, a Kyle Phillips, maybe even like the truther here, NWI maybe even sees a little spike in production. You get Shig maybe having a breakout season next season.
Yes. Even the worst players on the team, if they're a skill player, they're going to get better because they have more time to operate, right? This is obvious. We know what Ryan Tannehill can do with good offensive line play. He can pass for 3,500 yards in a season and win playoff games. Like this team was scoring 30 plus points every other Sunday, averaging 30 points a game in a season with Ryan Tannehill at the helm, with Derrick Henry and with AJ Brown, who, you now have Treylon Burks, you have Kyle Phillips, you have Racing McMath if he ever pans out. And then of course, NWI amongst other guys that they could potentially bring in and could surprise folks who we'll talk about in a little bit. All of those guys, Ryan Tannehill's life gets infinitely easier when he's got time in the pocket. Derrick Henry, we know what he can do if you just give him 3 or 4 steps before he gets contact. He's a runaway train, a downhill runner, but he can't build up that speed enough to deal with 2 steps and then being met 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Treylon Burks can be an awesome deep threat, but you got to give him time to get down the freaking field. Like all of these things are improved across the board when the offensive line creates time and creates power. Like those are the two that you have an infinitely more power in the run game. The force multiplication of having blocking prowess makes Derrick Henry and Tyjae Spears look a lot better. And then you buy time on the offense. The longer a secondary has to cover, the worse they get. So a guy like NWI, not a great receiver when he's got 2 seconds to get open. But if you give him 3.5, dude can get open. Dude can be a serviceable wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 in the NFL. So all of those things are going to look better if and when this offensive line improves. And JT, the last thing I'll say on receivers before we talk about line a little bit more, this Titans front office, we talked about this before the draft. I got to talk about it again now after. They are clearly much, much higher on their young wide receiver core than fans are. And they said this essentially in a press clip that I cannot find for the life of me, but I know that it was said and it was reported from one of the pressers that was early on in the offseason when Rand Carthen was new. This team is a lot happier with who they have in the building than fans are. They see more potential than fans do. And that's not to say that the team is happy with the level of play that Titans fans think that this wide receiver is going to produce. They are saying they think this team is going to be better at wide receiver than fans are giving it credit for. Now, on the offensive line side of things, I did this morning because a big part of this team getting better on the offensive line is not just bringing in better players, but you bring in youth, which this line needed badly. I went and looked at the last 2 years, this year and this upcoming year, the depth chart for the Titans on the offensive line front. In 2022, the starters were from left to right: Taylor Lewan, Aaron Brewer, Ben Jones, Nate Davis, Nicholas Petit-Frere. Their backups: Dennis Daly, Jamarco Jones, Corey Levin, and Dylan Radins. This year, the starters are presumably, and a lot of these guys can play multiple positions, so I think in camp it'll have to sort itself out. But right now, the presumed starting 5 from left to right: Andre Dillard, Peter Skoronski, Aaron Brewer at center now instead of guard, Daniel Brunskill at right guard, and Nicholas Petit-Frere at right tackle. And their backups: Jamarco Jones, Dylan Radins, Corey Levin, Roos, whose first name is escaping me, and Jalen Duncan out of Maryland in the 6th round. First of all, significantly better in terms of depth, and I think on par once these guys develop in terms of top end talent. Like, you've got 6 or 7 guys now on this team who you really can in an unbiased fashion look at and say they could be a serviceable NFL starter. Like they could work and be an average starter in the league. Whereas last year you had by week 6, there were like 3 of those guys, 4 of those guys. You had no depth, and you never had a starting 5 that didn't have a massive, massive weak link. Now, on the age front, and I think this goes to the weak link point, because the starting 5 last year for the Titans diminished dramatically throughout the season because all these old dudes kept getting hurt, couldn't stay on the field. Taylor Lewan plays a game in like 7 snaps. Ben Jones is concussion city. Nate Davis is on and off the field. It was a kind of a disaster, and you got a lot of Dennis Daly. Sobros Network adding they add John Ajokwu out of Boise State as an undrafted free agent, who is by the way, in terms of RAS, freaky athlete. I think he's north of 9'5", has all the measurables in the world to be a tackle, long arms, very, very athletic, just underdeveloped. But he's the kind of guy that on paper you could say, ooh, give this guy 2 years to develop, get him with the right offensive line coach. This guy could be a real I'd say a reasonable ceiling, a really good swing tackle, a really good sixth man of the year. Like, that's the kind of thing this team has infused this offensive line with. So they've got depth and they've got top end talent. They've also got a lot younger guys, which is so important. I went and looked at the age at the time of each of these offensive lines. In 22, you had 30-year-old Taylor Lewan, 24-year-old Aaron Brewer, 33-year-old Ben Jones, 26-year-old Nate Davis, 22-year-old MPF, for an average age of 27.4 years old. This year, the presumed starters, 27 years old for Andre Dillard, a 21-year-old Peter Skoronski, a 25-year-old Aaron Brewer, a 29-year-old Daniel Brunskill, and a 23-year-old Nicholas Petit-Frere, comes out to an average of 25 years old. So nearly 2.5 years younger on average. That is an offensive line that is more raw for sure, but absolutely has a higher ceiling than they currently like. There's room to grow. These guys have not reached their ceiling, and they're a group that you'd presume are going to be more healthy on average because they are younger and they've got less snaps under their belt. So this is a good thing. What is not a good thing, and what I'm not happy to have to do, but I do have to do it, JT, is I've got to call out our guy, Mike Herndon, who is my boy. Mike and I consider him a friend. I love Mike. I just disagree with him vehemently on this topic that we were talking about back and forth. I believe either yesterday or earlier today on Twitter, he was replying to somebody's tweet about whether or not the Titans could end up getting Marvin Harrison Jr. at the top of next year's draft. Could they trade up for it? And he said, hey, what if having the worst offensive line and wide receiver room in the entire league land the Titans right in the territory to get Marvin Harrison Jr. without having to trade? Now, first of all, I don't know what's happened to Mike. He has ever since he was on the Football and Other F-Word show called Mike Herndon's Darkness Retreat, which was a spoof on Aaron Rodgers' Darkness Retreat. He truly has been stuck in his darkness retreat. Mike, please step back from the ledge. Everything's going to be okay. This team is not destined for, he's not going into full panic fan mode. He truly just believes in his objective way. And he's a very good NFL mind. He thinks this team's just not going to be any good. He thinks they're going to be very bad. He disagrees with a lot of the decisions they've made. And I think that he's wrong. But the back and forth here, I just asked him, are you stuck a year in the past? There's no shot this line is worst in the league this year. I expect them to get a whole lot better in a hurry. They may start out really bad, but I guarantee they're twice as good as they started by week 8, week 9. Young, for sure, but I think a really talented group. And his response was, they've got a left tackle who started 9 games, a left guard that has started 0, a center who started 1 NFL game at center, which actually is 2. He was wrong about that, but regardless. A right guard who is a journeyman who lost his job to a mid-round rookie last year, and a right tackle who is the worst right tackle in the NFL last year from a grade standpoint, which is in reference to NPF. And he asks, who's worse? He goes on to say, if Dillard and Skoronski hit and NPF improves a bunch, they could be much, much better, but those are all ifs. I think you'll be hard pressed to find another line that is relying almost exclusively on players playing above their previous levels of achievement to reach even league average performance. And my response to this is, first of all, on the MPF front, that feels like a cheeky way of describing MPF last year, who had a good year for a rookie third rounder who should never have been thrown into the fire this early to begin with. And then at the end of the year, really tailed off. And I think part of that is due to some growing pains. And I think part of that is due to, you know what else tailed off at the end of last year? The guys around him on the offensive line. Like, he kept getting less and less talented, and he kept having more and more responsibility on his plate. And I think that there was some correlation there. But JT, how often do we see first-year tackles in particular, but linemen in general, again, who should never have been thrown into the fire as soon as they were, improve dramatically in year 2 or year 3? Like, a switch just flips for these guys. You've got a guy in who's the lineman up in New York who just got his 5th-year extension, who was terrible as a left tackle in his first season, and his 2nd or 3rd year, it flipped a switch, and now he's one of the best left tackles in the entire league. If you're looking that up for me, because I cannot remember his name to save my life. Who did you find him?
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now.
Okay, but we've seen this a number of times where guys just flip a switch, and they become a lot better in a hurry. So that's not to say MPF will be that guy, but I think that but there certainly is a decent chance that he's significantly better this year and makes a big jump. Thank you in the chat. Andrew Thomas from both Jacob
Yes, Andrew
and
Thomas.
Stoney. Andrew Thomas is a great example of one of those guys who looked like a complete and utter bust in his first year. And then the switch flipped, and now he's getting his 5th year extension, and he's going to get a multi-million-dollar, multi-year deal after his 5th year, I'm sure. Also, with Peter Skoronski, there was nothing even close to a no assembly out of the box player on the offensive line in this draft class not named Peter Skoronski. He was the closest to a plug and play day one league average or better starter, especially if he moves inside at guard. We've seen what Aaron Brewer is capable of at center. Not a whole lot, but we know it's his natural position. From a body type standpoint, it makes a lot more sense for him. We know that in the limited play he's gotten at center, he has been much better. And we also know that as long as his running mate is no longer Dennis Daly, things have to improve when he's got a better player on either side of him, which I expect him to have. And then with Dillard and Brunskill, those are the ones we really don't know about. And I concede that. It's definitely a projection with them until we see them play. Plenty of reason, I think, however, to believe that this will be at least better than the worst tackle and worst guard playing for this team last year, who were horrendous. Zach Lyons points out in the chat, Nate Davis made a massive jump as a 3rd-round guard from year 1 to year 2. So we have seen it time in and again with these guys making big year 1 to year 2 jumps. But even if your point with the offensive line, JT, is, hey, we just don't know. Andre Dillard as a left tackle could be awful, and Daniel Brunskill as a guard could be awful. We don't know. Yeah, they could be really bad. Are you willing to wager that they're going to be worse than the combo of tackle guard last year that was Dennis Daly and Aaron Brewer? I'm gonna wager at worst they're better than those guys. So again, at worst, this line gets better, and I think that they're going to be league average by the end of the season. Truly, if not better than that. It could be wishful thinking, but what I am very, very confident in is that they will not end the year as they started the year at the very bottom of the barrel in the NFL. Now, it was asked, still on the topic of why receiver over lineman, just some reporting here. Carthen was asked on 102.5 The Game the day after the draft ended that he was asked why they didn't end up going with the receiver at any point in the draft or earlier than they did, rather. And he said that we believe in our guys that we have, or they would not be here. He also said, quote, to fill a roster takes patience. You don't want to reach based off of a need. Now, Mike Vrabel said at some point this weekend that the Titans would be active on the waiver wire Monday as rosters shake up around the league and you see guys become available. There were no such moves. So either Vrabel was lying just to get people like Paul Karski to shut up about it, or he was saying that starting Monday we'll be looking for guys on those lists. And so that's something that is fair to critique Mike Vrabel for. He said that it didn't happen, but I think we should be patient. There's a lot of months here between when they need to have bodies for camp and now. I do think, JT, they have a couple of real options this summer that they can address in free agency or, more importantly, in the trade market. We've mentioned before Corey Davis, who I know Zach Lyons is going to come flying in here and say there's no way Corey Davis comes back to Tennessee based on the way that things ended with him and things we've heard on like the Raw Room podcast where he's been vocal about not being so happy about the way things ended. I get that. I think that in terms of relationship, there may be a bridge that's burned there, so maybe not. But the Jets wide receiver room has like 700 players in it. They can't keep all of them, and a number of them are starting caliber players. Certainly would become starters on the Titans team. You've also got guys like the Denver wide receiver room. This was brought up by Marcus Mosher on Twitter. He said, I think Denver is going to have to trade a wide receiver at some time soon because right now their receiver room is Cortland Sutton with an $18.2 million cap hit, Jerry Jeudy on a 5th-year option, Tim Patrick with an $11 million cap hit, KJ Hamler, which was a 2nd-round pick, Marvin Mims, their 2nd-round pick this past year, and Marquez Callaway, who they traded for with Sean Payton in the room now. So they're probably not going to keep all of those guys. And as Stoney points out in the chat, maybe Corey Davis's gripe was with John Robinson and Mike, not Mike Vrabel. I mean, Mike Vrabel is not the one that chose not to re-sign him. That was John Robinson. So maybe him and Mike are still tight. We don't know. So the point here is they've still got options. We've also heard from Ian Carthen, hey, there's some leagues that are ending soon that we might be looking to add some bodies for camp, see if we can get some diamonds in the rough. That's obviously mentioning the USFL, the XFL. These are guys that, you could take a flyer on and at least have a body in camp. And it made me bring back up a tweet from April 8th where I mentioned, hey, there's a guy in the XFL, this Butler kid. I don't know I forget who he was even playing for, but he was a Cardinals 4th-round pick in 2019. I think Hakeem Butler, I think is his name. 4th-round pick in 2019. He bounced around the NFL and the CFL before he joined the XFL Battlehawks this past spring. So there you go. He's just 26 years old. And when you look up his athletic testing, seems like the kind of player at least worth having in your building in August. I mean, he's got a 97th percentile height, 95th percentile weight, 98th percentile wingspan, 99th percentile arm length, 98th percentile hand size. He's got good vertical 40-yard dash, broad jump, bench press. So he's a athlete through and through. Like, he is on his RAS web almost filled in the whole thing. He's a stud athlete. Clearly, he's just not a very refined receiver. But this past season in the XFL, he's a guy that I think he led the league in touchdowns and yards. Like, he was the stud receiver in the league. So we could see something like that happen. And with that, JT, let's get to our next question. I know we are running a little bit long here, but you know what? There's a lot to cover, so it's going to be a little long.
Yeah, and this one is a real question it is. And it's from, we just pulled this one straight from Jim Wyatt's mailbag here.
Is that where this is from? Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And this is from a guy named Jay Goodman from Friendsville, Tennessee. And
sounds like a friendly guy.
Let me get ready to read this question here. Just let me
get into character a little bit.
Yeah. FYI to everyone, I will never watch another Titans game, and they should not be able to use Tennessee in their name. They drafted a Kentucky quarterback over Hendon Hooker, and he defeated Will Levis in a head-to-head game.
Well,
all of Hendon's stats are higher than Will Levi's. Yes, there's a
future brand potential there. Yeah.
If you can't support our real Tennessee football, then you don't need to be in Tennessee. Move to Kentucky with the rest of those losers. So thank you, Jay.
Bold choice to call an entire state losers, the entire state of Kentucky. Also, I love Jim's response to this, where he says, "Appreciate the heads up, Jay. I can't speak for others, but personally, I'm sure gonna miss you. Be blessed." Which is
me too,
very
honestly.
snarky. Yeah, I'm gonna miss you so much, Jay. And I totally believe him that he's never gonna watch these guys again. I for one think that this was a joke. I think this is a normal person that has a good sense of humor that sent this in, because I just refuse to believe, JT, that somebody with a sub 60 IQ knows how to use a computer, let alone operate an email. So I just don't think that this is real. Stoney pointing out that Jim White knows exactly what he's doing. Jim, he's a kind guy, but when it comes to his words, the snark is real. Whenever you think there might be some sass, there's some sass in there. I'm with you entirely. Now let's get to a real fake question, real answer that we wrote up kind of on the same topic. JT, what's the next real question here?
Yeah, and this one comes from @SadForLevis season from Eagleville. He says,
"Oh no,
why draft Levis in the second if they didn't have the conviction to draft him in the first?"
It's a fair question, and this is another example of one that I want to go to Dane Brugler's draft guide so that we can have a little bit of reference here. I'm zooming in because it's very small so I can read it. All right, here we go. So here is what Dane Brugler wrote in his draft guide. Again, the beast, go pay for the Athletic. We're stealing this directly from him, so got to give him shouts. Like, he does an amazing job. Got to meet him briefly in Indianapolis. Awesome guy, and he's the best in the business. So here's what he had to say in his evaluation of Will Levis. His strengths: well-built athlete and impressive physical traits. Lightning quick release with above average velocity to drive the ball to every inch of the field. Strong in the pocket to brush off tackle attempts and make accurate off-balance throws. Stands tall versus the blitz and can withstand constant pressure. Improved pocket footwork in his drops and also his slides and shuffles to buy time. Composed and focused on money downs. 71.6% completions on third down in 2022, the worst of his 2 seasons. Sells fake plays with conviction to draw coverage, offers functional run skills, and is a physical finisher to routinely pick up extra yardage after contact. Extremely high pain tolerance to bounce back and play through injuries. Super competitive demeanor and not afraid to fail. His high school and college coaches speak highly of his leadership, presence, and intensity as a worker. An NFL scout said, quote, "Football is really important to him." Voted, so he's not going to be Andrew Luck. That's good. Voted a team captain in both of his seasons at Kentucky and immediately became, quote, the guy when he arrived in Lexington. Kentucky offensive coordinator Liam Cohen said of him, quote, "The team feeds off of him. His personality is one of which that guys naturally follow." He posted a 17-7 career record as a college starter, 8-7 versus the SEC, 9-0 against non-SEC teams. Accounted for 43 passing touchdowns in his 2 seasons at Kentucky, which ranks number 5 in school history. The weaknesses: average passing instincts, decision-making, and accuracy. Doesn't consistently trust his vision. Creates too many hitches and pullbacks with his arm and disrupts his base. Predetermines throws before reading. Will lock onto receivers and trusts the play design to a fault. needs to refine his lower body passing mechanics to keep all his movements on the same page, inconsistent deep ball trajectory, often underthrowing his target or overthrowing his target, to be fair. His accuracy is passable, but ball placement must improve to help his receivers from having to adjust. He doesn't throw receivers open and needs to anticipate windows quicker when asked to play in rhythm, holds the ball too long and takes some unnecessary sacks, especially with late to read blitz. Missed one game as a senior because of a left foot injury in October of last year, which affected him over the second half of the season. His production declined in 2022 with a new supporting cast. Now, the summary is a 2-year starter at Kentucky. Levis has a promising 21 season in offensive coordinator Liam Cohen's scheme with a 31.8 average points per game and 10 wins. However, he struggles with consistency in 2022 as the offense saw a complete makeover with Wan'Dale Robinson and multiple offensive linemen departing to the NFL and a new play caller, Rich Scangarello, taking over for Cohen, who left to become the Los Angeles Rams offensive coordinator. Physically built for the pro game, Levis is strong in the pocket, moves very well for his size, and has a powerful arm to deliver with velocity and accuracy from various platforms. However, defenses are too easily able to put doubt in his mind, which lead to forced or inaccurate throws because of his hesitancy in his game. Overall, Levis needs more reps to continue developing his read efficiency and ball placement, but he has NFL starter skills with the impressive physical tools to boot, size, arm, athleticism, and exceptional competitive toughness. Similarities with Carson Wentz should be considered both positive and negative, but he has high starter level traits and upside and is great on him, which I agree with. Number 14 overall, a first round grade. Now, before we talk about why the crux of this question, JT, why draft him in the second if you didn't have the conviction to draft him in the first? My comps for Will Levis coming into the draft, just to reiterate, the 10th percentile is Carson Wentz throwing a left-handed interception in his own end zone. Like, that's the worst case you're desperately trying to avoid. His 50th percentile for me has all along been Ryan Tannehill, and his 100th percentile, and I had a lot of debates with folks about this. A lot of you don't understand how 100th percentile works. When you're doing a 100th percentile comp for a guy, you're looking at their athletic profile and their play style and saying, what's the best case scenario for this guy? What's the best case real life example that we've seen of a guy who had this same profile and same play style, that if everything clicks, what can he become? A lot of people thought his ceiling 100 percentile were the same thing. Ceiling and 100th percentile are different in my mind. Although I think you could argue either way. A lot of people said that his 100th percentile comp was Ryan Tannehill, or I heard a lot of Jay Cutler, which you're missing the point. You're missing the point. Both of those guys, Jay Cutler and Ryan Tannehill, both had higher 100th percentile comps coming out of college than what their career ended up being. Their careers ended up around the 50th percentile, so that's missing the point. My 100th percentile comp is prime Matthew Stafford, who doesn't have to toil in Detroit for 10 years. I think that is the best case scenario for him, and we have seen Matthew Stafford, a quarterback capable of winning a Super Bowl. In fact, the second he got out of Detroit, won a Super Bowl. So certainly a guy that you would like to have on your team, and a guy that I think is certainly a franchise quarterback. And JT, I'm willing to go out on a limb and say, hey, maybe landing on the team with your perfect NFL comp, who you get to sit behind for a whole year, learn from, and develop behind, maybe that's a really great landing spot.
I mean, it probably is one of the best. Like,
is there a better one?
Probably not, especially if you're going to probably learn from someone. To throw Will Levis in the fire is probably, and just start him at the beginning of the year would probably be the worst case scenario. But the fact that he does not have to do that is probably his best case scenario.
Hingle McCringleberry in the chat pointing out, on par with Stat Padford. Ouch, that's a funny nickname. But here's the thing, and there were a number of folks who were unhappy with the Will Levis pick. Of course, it was mostly, let's see, Mr. Jones. Titans messed up by passing on Hooker. They would have doubled their fan base, instant home field advantage, upgrade, and he is a winner. All right, Mr. Jones. We're not going to address that. I vehemently disagree with you. Hooker went where he belonged in the third round as a backup in Detroit. He's going to be a great backup, going to make a lot of money and throw like 17 passes in his career and be awesome in that way. You know what, truly with Hendon Hooker, I think that he could be a Jacoby Brissett, an above average backup that you don't mind as a starter for a brief amount of time. And Jacob Sane points out that Tannehill is a bad mentor. Definitely that is something that we have to be so worried about, that Ryan Tannehill is going to just intentionally ruin Will Levis's career. a lot of SEC fans, and by SEC fans, I mean Tennessee fans, were unhappy with this, of course. A guy on Twitter who I'm friendly with. I think he's very good at his job, and I like him a lot, but he's a Tennessee fan, and he disagrees with me on Will Levis. Charlie Burris over at A to Z Sports. His reaction was, you lose any chance of drawing in Tennessee fans, you push away Tennessee fans you had, and you instantly become the laughing stock in the league. Genius, very on-brand move for the Titans. You sound upset, Charlie. I'm sorry you're upset. My response to this is, if certain SEC fans are going to be so blinded by their college allegiances to allow for this inaccurate and insane pro-level talent evaluation, which is different than college-level evaluation. College fans will tell you, well, we are the ones that actually watch the games. That is not the argument that you think it is, man. You've watched them in college. You've not done all 22 tape analysis on them and considered, how does this game translate to the NFL? How is this going to work when they don't have a collegiate scheme or a stud offensive line or stud players around them? Like, there's a lot that goes into the transition from college to the NFL, and all you're watching is college broadcasts on Saturdays. You're not the expert you think you are on these guys. But if that's going to allow these crazy fans, if this is going to push them away, then good. Bye. Like, cool. Less irrational people in a fan base that of the team that I cover. I'm cool with that. And I don't think Charlie's being irrational. I gave him a very long, detailed answer on why I think Will Levis is a good fit. He just disagrees, and that's fine. There's room on both sides of this argument with Will Levis. We don't know what he's going to be. It's a risk with him. He was the fourth riskiest guy in this draft class of quarterbacks, which I don't know if you've noticed, drafting high draft pick quarterbacks in the NFL is typically a dangerous proposition. A lot of them fail. I also have to point this out. Actually, look around the league. If you think the Titans are the laughing stock in the league for this pick, you're in an echo chamber. You're in an SEC echo chamber, because around the league, people approve. Many even really like this move. There's a reason they're getting a bunch of A+ draft grades for their draft. It's just SEC country that thinks that he's a joke. I don't want to go into my Will Levis evaluation too much right now, just in terms of trying to break down what is good, what is bad, what my opinion on him is. We did a lot of that in the QB episode before the draft, so go listen to that. We're also going to do a Will Levis only episode where we break all of that down in the near future, so we'll do that then. I want to talk, JT, about the crux of this question. Why take him at 33 if you're not willing to take him at 11? I am exceedingly confident in hindsight, as we're evaluating the rubble of this draft. I am super, super confident that Will Levis would have been the Titans pick at 11 if the Bears hadn't gone off the board and taken Darnell Wright at 10. We were expecting, many of us in the national media, it sounds like in Bears country, Darnell Wright seems to be the favorite at the last minute, is what I've been told. But this is a team that we kind of thought Skoronski would be a perfect landing spot there. That would be the guy that they'd take. Number one, lineman in the draft. They'll probably go with Skoronski, and he won't be there at 11. Certainly, that's what the Titans thought. They didn't think Johnson Jr. or Skoronski would be there at 11, as they told us after. And I quote, "We didn't think he'd be there at 11." So everything we've heard and everything we believe we know about this team indicates that that was the surprising move that changed the BPA best player available math for this Titans team. And they suddenly had the best player available on their board, Peter Skoronski, there for the taking at 11. They have a big needed offensive line, so they make that move. Now, it's been reported reliably by folks that I trust and by a number of different people from different sources. So I think it's a reliable report, JT. The Titans were one of a couple of teams really, really, really trying to trade back into the first round at the end of the night on Thursday. They were trying to get back into those 20s, and they couldn't get it done. Nobody could. It was reported that other teams like the Rams, maybe the Raiders, maybe the Lions were all considering it as well. And so it's something that, if the argument is they weren't willing to draft him in the first round, based on this reporting, they were not just willing to draft him in the first round, they wanted to. They just had a better player available at 11. And again, this is a BPA team by all indications. They go with their best player. But I'm pretty confident that Will Levis was the next best available player on their board, which, by the way, is interesting to me that if you do the math here, Will Levis was less valuable than Peter Skoronski on their board, but more valuable than Anthony Richardson on their board. You would think at least more valuable than trading up for Anthony Richardson, because they could have gone to 3 and gotten Richardson, and they did not. So they valued these guys differently than I did. But regardless, they stuck with their board, which you have to give them credit for. You stick to your guns, even if your opinion's unpopular. Now, could they have explored a trade down option at 11 instead of taking Skoronski and take Levis in the teens or the 20s? Yeah, I think that you could, but I'm confident he was the next guy up on their board if Skoronski was gone. And I also think that that's a risky proposition, right? You don't know if you're going to get Skoronski or Levis. If you trade down, you may miss out on both. And if those are the two guys at the very top, then cool. Go after that guy if you have that guy in your lap, like they did with Skoronski at 11. They got very lucky that Levis fell out of the first, and they clearly thought they should waste no time in risking it anymore, because they moved up to 33 overall to get him instead of sticking at 41 and waiting for him to continue to fall. They had reason to believe he would not be there at 41. But they clearly got to double dip on their premium grades. And that's the big point here. If you're wondering why the Titans seemed so happy on those first two nights with what was going on, you hear all the time, JT. What is the average number of first round grades these teams typically throw out there? It's like
maybe
20?
10, like
10
at least
this
year. This year, it was like everybody was coming out being like, we don't have first round grade blue chip grades on like any of these guys. Like that's like all we were hearing before the draft.
Right. And you hear that from all these teams. There's rarely a draft where there are 32 blue chip first round graded guys. The Titans clearly had both of these guys in their first round grade blue chipper. So they got to double dip. And how often do you get to see a team with only 6 picks and no double picks in the first round get 2 of the guys that they had in their top tier of players? So no wonder they're excited, and good for them. And we'll see if they're right and this works out. One last thing on Levis before we move on. This was a thread by Braden Gall, and they talked about it a lot. Braden and Zach Lyons over on a football show yesterday, they talked about this, but I thought it was worth bringing up because it's a very good thread. Talking about quarterbacks in this range of the 30 to 40, early second round grade range. It's kind of perceived as this no man's land elephant graveyard of quarterbacks. But in this is the last, since 2007, these are the quarterbacks drafted between 30 and 39. And they've averaged 97 games played so far. And not one of them, according to Braden, is even close to a bust. I know Zach would argue that they were, some of these guys were a bust for their team, but they've worked out in the end in the NFL. You've got Lamar Jackson, who's played 70 games. Teddy Bridgewater, who was a bust for the Vikings, but has not been a bust in general with 78 games. Derek Carr, 142 games. Geno Smith, very late bloomer, but now played 62 games and got a big contract this past year as a starter. Andy Dalton, who was not, took your Bengals to the playoffs like 2 or 3 times in his first 4 or 5 years, right? I mean, he at first was a guy it was a good team around him, but he certainly was getting playoff berths. I wouldn't call him a bust. And then Colin Kaepernick, who was in multiple NFC championship games and played in the Super Bowl in his short run, who played 69 games. So this is an area where we've actually seen a lot of quarterback success in recent years. And it's the guys it's the Drew Locks that are taken in the late second round, who typically are, kind of a disaster. And Ryan points out in the chat here, he was okay, Teddy Bridgewater, for the Vikings until his knee disintegrated. And I remember you've seen that hit, JT, the hit I'm talking about, where he just gets total cheap shot and gets him knocked out and he becomes this head case. So things beyond his control contributed there. The last thing I'll say on Levis, one thing being overlooked by fans, I think, for this Ryan Tannehill, Will Levis comp, like, why would they go get another Ryan Tannehill if the comp for him is Ryan Tannehill? JT, there's a big difference between Ryan Tannehill as a $30+ million cap hit, the version of Ryan Tannehill the Titans have had, and a Ryan Tannehill on a rookie contract. That is a cheap rookie contract because you got him in the second round. Now, you don't get a 5th-year option. And so, will we ever see Levis become a Tannehill quality starter on his rookie contract? Good question. Don't know. Doesn't help that his contract is only 4 years. Does help, I think, however, that he's 24 years old, has played a lot of football. So he's experienced. He's not Anthony Richardson, who played 12 games in college. He's got a lot of experience and is more polished in that way. So, if he manages to get to Ryan Tannehill levels of play by the time his rookie contract is up, that's going to allow this team for maybe a year or two to really go all in and put an awesome squad around him, a squad that, a guy like Ryan Tannehill, you'd assume this is a team good enough to make a run with a guy like Ryan Tannehill. All right, let's move on to the next question. And I promise these questions get shorter as we go. We've prioritized them in most to least important fashion. So what's our next question?
Yeah, the next one, we're going to still talk about QBs here because you just cannot stop. But this one comes from Confused Kyle all the way down in Paris, Texas. Sounds like he's confused where he's from. What should the Titans do at quarterback? What will they do?
So, and to be fair, I can't quit talking about quarterbacks because that's the way of the NFL, baby. That's all we do is talk quarterbacks. And the Titans have a new one. There are 3 options, and I'll keep this short. If you want more detail on this, me and Stoney Keeley, who's in the chat hanging out, we talked about this at length on the show that we posted yesterday, the NFL Draft Live first 3 picks cut up. And we talked about this at length, but I just want to put this out here. And folks are talking about it, and they'll be talking about it more and more as we get closer and closer to August. What do the Titans do at quarterback? There are 3 options, I think, JT. There are, Will Levis sits behind Ryan Tannehill. The team makes it clear, hey, Levis is going to sit. This is Tannehill's team for this year. He's going to develop. We'll see you in 2024. There is the opposite of that. Hey, Ryan Tannehill, we're going to make you a post-June 1st cut, or we're going to trade you away. And Will Levis, we're going to throw you into the fire. We're going to get you some reps. We're going to see what we've got in this first year. Then there's option 3, which is, I think, without a doubt, under no circumstances should you do this. This is a bad idea always. You get Ryan Tannehill to start, and the idea is, well, eventually Will Levis will step in there. We just don't know when. Maybe week 6, maybe week 8, maybe week 10. And you get to do what the Bears did with Andy Dalton and Justin Fields in his first year. It became this massive controversy each and every week. Who's going to play quarterback? When should the right time for Justin Fields be? You get these confidence issues where, you put a guy in and you pull him out, you put him back in, you pull him out. Like, it's a disaster. And the old adage, if you got 2 quarterbacks, you got no quarterbacks. That is the worst possible way to go about this. I don't think they're going to go about it that way. If Ryan Tannehill is the guy and then he gets injured, that's different. But you don't plan on arbitrarily at some point switching him over, because it never ends well, I don't think. So the question is, do you go all in or do you go all out on Will Levis in this year? JT, we didn't get your opinion on Friday night. So do you have an opinion on this? Are you still marinating on this question? What would you do?
I'm all out on him this
Let
year.
him sit.
Yeah. With the injury clause here, that's where I
can see the wheels turning. Yeah.
With the injury clause, it's a little interesting because if you
would you put Malik in over him?
That's what you're saying. I'm
is Malik still on the team by then?
I hate that I'm kind of debating that if he gets injured, is Malik going above him? I don't know, because you just kind of see horror stories of last year. Now Malik Willis probably isn't as good of a prospect as Will Levis is, but still there's something to be said about throwing him into the fire right from the get-go, because if you lose Ryan Tannehill again, considering what they have on this team right now, you're probably not pushing for a championship anyways. So it might be better to cut your losses, move up your draft pick into the top 10 where there's some really good weapons and wide receivers and whatnot next year, and just kind of wait it out. Continue to wait it out. So
I kind of disagree with you, but I kind of agree with you too. I'm still marinating on this. I don't have a firm answer yet. I can tell you this much. If you were to ask me what will they do, I'm 95% confident Ryan Tannehill is still around and Will Levis learns behind him. So Titans fans, if you are dead set on get Ryan Tannehill out of here, gotta get him out, gotta get Will Levis in there, see what we got. I've got bad news for you. I really don't think it's going to happen. I just don't see a world in which it happens. The way that everything has, all the clues, all the breadcrumbs point to Ryan Tannehill being here next year. But what would be the best thing to do? We've seen both options work really well, and we've seen both options work really poorly, right? This team has a really significant parallel right now to the Andy Reid-led Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes team of that first year of Patrick Mahomes' season or career in Kansas City in 2018, 19, or no, before that, 17, where had Patrick Mahomes sit an entire year. Then after that season, Alex is moved off to Washington. His contract is up. We get Patrick in there, and he's had a whole year to improve and develop behind the scenes. And we, as coaches, we see him in practice every day. We got a pretty good idea of what we've got in this guy, right? They could do that, the Titans, and it could work out really well, as it worked out incredibly well for the Chiefs. On the other hand, that route runs the risk of, or just you are sacrificing the fact that you're not going to get one of the 4, not 5 years on Will Levis's contract to see what he's got. So you've limited yourself there. And if the idea is, he's going to come in and probably need a full year of playing to get to that ceiling or to really, improve dramatically, the only way to really learn in the NFL, especially at the quarterback position, is to get live reps. And so at some point he's got to do that. That's a sacrifice in terms of time and in terms of team building. On the other hand, you start him right away. You run the risk of the confidence being shot, this team not being in a place around him to support him in a way to really give him the tools necessary to succeed. You run the risk of, Ryan Tannehill being gone, Will Levis being here, and Malik being the backup. If Levis does not work or goes down with an injury, then you're with Malik and it's a full tank. Now, with some people, that's a good thing. Some it's not. Ultimately, I think the best case scenario, I lean towards throw him in the fire, see what you've got. The problem is with Ryan Tannehill, I think cutting him is an awful option. I know Zach Lyons talked about this on a football show yesterday. That would be the worst thing that they could do from a future money standpoint, from a compensatory pick standpoint, from a getting anything in return for Tannehill standpoint. And if you cut him, he's going to be picked up in instant. There's no way he's just not in the league anymore. He's too good. He'll go to a Washington or to an Atlanta and make them a playoff team, frankly. I do think if you could get a trade partner and get some compensation back, even if it's just a 3rd round pick next year, which you don't have any longer, or, a 3rd and a 5th or a 4th and a 5th, then I think about it. I really do think about it. And I think that the ceiling here is a lot that this team and their 2022 outlook changes a ton in that scenario, right? I think Ryan Tannehill wins at least 3 more games this year than if Will Levis played the whole season. And you could argue maybe it's more like 4 or 5. I think that there's that big a difference in their first year. And it's really, I think Levis by the end of the season could be as good as Tannehill, but that learning curve, the first 8 games, they may go 3-5, whereas Ryan Tannehill may go 5-3, 6-2. So it's a debate to be had for sure what they should do. But in the end, I think it's kind of a foolish debate, frankly, because I'm pretty confident the Titans know what they're doing. And what they're doing is we're going to ride with both guys and let Levis sit.
Yeah, let's move on to our next question here, which comes from @ACL Lover95 from Mountain City, Tennessee.
Big ligament guy.
He writes, why draft a running back of all positions and why take one with no ACL? ?
So the rub with new Titans running back Tyjae Spears is the fact that it came out on draft night. Hey, this dude's got one less ACL than the average person, which is a 50% decrease in ACL. It's pretty significant. Before we talk about his injury, I got to read the Dane Brugler from The Athletic, the Beast. This was his write-up. This was his analysis of Tyjae Spears, just so we can get a detailed look from a scouting perspective of the strengths and weaknesses. Here are the strengths. Runs with quick feet, lateral agility, and explosive cutting skills. Sees the field well to instinctively read, slash, and flow. Regains his speed post-cut in a flash. Impressive body balance and control on his start-stop moves. Averaged 4.52 yards after contact in 2022. Whoops, I just changed the tab. Pardon me. Let me pull him back up. Where are you? This is great radio.
It is.
Here we go. All right. 4.52 yards after contact per carry in 2022. Stays patient behind lead blocks and accelerates through creases before pursuit can reach. Can make defenders miss in the hole with subtle hip and shoulder shimmies. Will lower his pads and keep his feet through weak tackle attempts. Comfortable chipping and flashes fight in pass pro. Per Spears, quote, "My quarterback becomes my best friend, and you have to protect your buddy." Now my computer wants to do a reset. No, thank you. Later. You have to protect your buddy. Quick hands to pluck in the screen game. Nose for the end zone and ties for the FBS lead with Pittsburgh's Israel Abanikanda in total touchdowns with 21 last year. Scored a touchdown every 13.8 carries during his career. Led the AAC in rushing yards with 1,500 in 2022 and averaged more than 6.0 yards per carry in each of his 4 seasons in college. His weaknesses: smallish frame and build with a lean lower body, tends to slow at contact and lacks the run strength to power through congestion, average contact balance, and will struggle to escape NFL wrap tackles, accelerates in a flash but lacks a breakaway gear and can be caught from behind, shows blocking determination on some plays but looks disinterested on others. His lack of size hurts his success rate on blitz pickups, his inconsistent tracking on throws over the shoulder, battled a nagging hammy injury in 2022, spring and regular season, suffered a torn ACL and meniscus in his right knee in September of 2020, requiring season-ending surgery. In summary, a 3-year starter at Tulane, Spears was consistently productive in offensive coordinator Jim Svabato's RPO-based multiple offense. After a torn ACL in 2020 and a shared workload in 21, he had an extremely productive 22 campaign, finishing number 5 in the country in rushing yards with 1,581 and rushing yards per carry, 6.90. Spears is a slippery runner with a dynamic start and stop cutting ability, patient vision, and darting acceleration, which are highlighted on counter and outside zone plays. He has the functional skills to provide value in the passing game, and he can be more dependent as a blocker and a pass catcher. Overall, Spears doesn't have desired build or run strength, but his explosive read, plant, burst action allows him to abruptly change his rush path and elude tacklers. He shows the potential for 3-down duties, although he will be able to be best fitted in a committee similar to Buffalo Bills' James Cook. And he gave him a third round grade, number 73 overall. So right around where the Titans ended up taking him at 81 overall, I believe. JT, the big news on him when the Titans drafted him was, hey, this guy doesn't have any ACLs. It came out basically right after the pick from Ian Rappaport per Rap Sheet at the combine. New Titans running back Tyjae Spears' medicals showed no ACL in one of his knees, a loss of cartilage, and arthritis. Questions about, quote, if his career can outlast his first contract. That's why a player of his caliber dropped to a 3rd round pick. Now, the Titans brass was asked about this. GM Rand Carthon was asked about if this came into consideration, and he said, quote, we had a really good visit with him when we brought him in. In terms of his medicals, we understood where our risk was, and we felt good about it going forward. So clearly the Titans doctors and Titans brass have decided that this is a risk worth taking with Spears. And this is something that from our guy Zach Lyons over at Football and Other F Words at F Words Pod on Twitter. Spears tore his ACL in 2015 in high school, and then again in 2020 in college, same ACL. Here's an example, JT, of a college player who tore his ACL twice in college, was drafted at the 65th overall pick in the 3rd round, and played for 16 years. Can you guess who this running back might be? The clue is he played for 16 years.
Who's a long running back?
Just recently retired. Spent a long time with the Niners.
Oh, Frank Gore.
Frank Gore, baby. Frank Gore, same ACL twice in the same leg in 2002 and 2003, and then went on to have the career that he had, which is a borderline Hall of Fame career. So it's not impossible to have a long and prosperous career with no ACL in one knee. But from Pro Football, man, I am a mispronunciation machine today, JT.
Yeah.
Pro Football Doc over on Twitter, David J. Chow, he said, now reports of full thickness cartilage loss, end stage arthritis, which would explain why his knee is not unstable with an ACL tear. Arthritic knee with bone spurs are rarely unstable, can play in the NFL, but may have a very short career. Before I give my thoughts on this, JT, your father is a doctor of this area of expertise. You asked him about this and got a response from him, correct?
Yeah, so I asked him, I basically told him, he said he fell to the 3rd round because he basically just doesn't have an ACL, loss of cartilage and arthritis in the knee. And I said, with that said, do you think he could play more than 3-ish seasons? And the response I got was, depends how bad the arthritis is and if the knee is unstable, which clearly, apparently, with his certain condition, it looks like it's more stable than unstable. But he was shocked that he went as high as he did in the 3rd round. He says 3 to 4 seasons at most, because then the arthritis becomes a serious concern.
Right. So it is a concern in terms of his health, for sure. I'll say this, JT. The wailing and gnashing of teeth that we've gotten from Titans fans over this was very predictable and I think very ridiculous. First of all, watch the tape. It's not a hindrance, obviously. If you watch last year, there's nowhere in his tape where you're like, is that guy missing an ACL? Like, that's not a thing that you think when you're watching the tape. Number 2, it sounds like his career may not last long. That's a bummer. But number 3, JT, I've been reliably informed by the nerds and the NFL as a whole, giving a second contract to a running back, typically a really, really bad idea. Usually doesn't work out for you.
Not the best.
So if you're telling me this guy's going to be electric for 3 or 4 years and then maybe fall off a cliff, great. Perfect. Awesome. What's the concern here? Why are we upset? Go watch the tape of this guy. JT, injury aside, you and I loved this guy coming into the draft. He's an electric factory. He was our wide receiver 3. I mean, we loved him.
Running back 3, but yes. I mean, you said wide receiver, but not to mean, I mean,
subconscious still wanting receivers.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But like, if you go and look at like what the routes he was running at the Senior Bowl, I mean, the dude could run routes and he will be used in that game. I think a lot of people have been
him transporting. I mean, he just teleported away from this dude. Go find it on our Twitter account. He's a stud.
Yeah, he definitely, like, I get the comps to, he's just going to replace the Dontrell Hilliard role. But like, Dontrell Hilliard is not as good of a pass catcher as Tyjae Spears is going to be. He's going to add a whole new,
not the ceiling,
a whole new dynamic to the offense here. And it's going to just improve what they already kind of were building on with the receiving game for running backs. But of course, now you probably have one of the top 2 guys in the class to do it.
I think Hilliard is a pretty good comp for Spears, except I think Spears just has a higher ceiling and is better at everything slightly than Hilliard is. And first of all, Hilliard's not going to be available. So like they need it. People are wondering like, why draft a running back? That was in this question. Why draft a running back? You got Derrick Henry. Behind him, you got Dontrell Hilliard, who tore an ACL mid to late season last year. You don't know what he's going to be when he comes back. You don't know when he's going to come back. Then you've got a bunch of blah. Last year,
the nasty nut, baby.
Yeah, the nasty nut, Julius Chestnut out of Sacred Heart University, practice squad guy. You don't want him seeing the field, but he's electric when we do. We love him as a meme. And then the rookie last season, I'm completely blanking out of Michigan. Shoot, help me out here.
Yeah, I'll go look it up.
I'm completely blanking on the guy. That's how forgettable he was, frankly. He had a really, really, really bad year, and he showed a bunch of he's not
Hassan
Haskins. Yeah, he's not shown a lot of flash, or he's not really shown a lot of detriment to the team either. He's just meh. The point is, you don't want him being the backup option. You don't want him being the third down guy. And at this point in Derrick Henry's career, he's a liability on third down. You don't want him out there on third down. You do want a Tyjae Spears out there on third down, and that's why I'm not sure you could build in a lab a better complementary back to Derrick Henry than Tyjae Spears. He's going to be the guy on third down you can put in there, and you have all of these secret, element of surprise at your disposal. You still don't know as a defense, is this team going to throw? Are they going to pass? Are they going to or throw and pass? Same thing. Are they going to hand the ball off? You have all the opportunities to pass to the running back, use him as a blocking third down back, use him as a runner on third down with Tyjae Spears in the game. And that's why I think for 3 or 4 years, Titans fans are going to really, really love this guy. My only question is he wore 22 in college. Is that number taken for the Titans? Are we sure that that's available? I'm kind of thinking that's maybe taken.
He could probably find a way to get it though.
Yeah, I'm sure Derrick Henry is really looking to give up the 22 number. All right, let's move on to our next question.
Yeah, our next question here is going to come from our good friend at Titan Tim 7 from Pulaski.
Good to hear from you again, Titan.
He says, Josh Wiley, you rarely talked about him, and when you did, it was a bad fit for the Titans, JT. You like to make fun of me, now I'm going to make fun of you. What's the deal with Josh Wiley?
So let me first read the Dane Brugler report on Josh Wiley, and then, JT, while I'm doing that, go ahead and pull up our draft guide because I want you to read what we wrote about him, which I agree with you in the draft guide. And in terms of picks by the Titans in this draft, this is the one that confused me the most, the one that I'm not sure I'm in on the most. But here's what Dane Brugler had to say. Strengths: good-sized athlete with a tapered waist and projectable frame. It's kind of a weird way to start, not sure. Tapered waist. Okay, all right. Gliding mover with above-average speed. Read his triangle, will, corner safety, well to uncover on option routes. Loose-hipped with the body control to extend and adjust to throws outside of his body. His catch radius gives him an advantage on end zone fades. Willing blocker and showed improved control as a senior compared to his underclassman tape, especially as a stock blocker. Doesn't have great sustain, but will throw his weight around into linebackers to slow them down. His senior season was the first time he maintained a weight of 250 plus pounds. His coaches say he went from an immature kid who needed direction to an accountable senior captain who grew up each year on campus. His 15 career touchdowns is the most by a tight end in Cincinnati team history. Weaknesses: shorter arms than expected for a player his size, solid hands, but his trekking focus comes and goes, especially on the move, drags, crossers, etc. His over-the-shoulder skills on fades are unpredictable, inconsistent finisher in traffic, and struggles to match the physicality of linebackers and safeties, upright route runner, and needs to improve his stem footwork and balance to better explode out of breaks, does not break tackles, fits his body, but his technique falls apart when attempting to sustain. Injuries have been an issue for him, suffered a fractured collarbone during fall practice in 2018, requiring surgery and forcing him to redshirt, missed most of 2019 with several nagging injuries, including an ankle injury, suffered a Liz Frank injury on his left foot in the final minutes of the Cotton Bowl in the loss to Alabama in December 21. Mediocre production, and his best numbers came in 2020. In summary, a 3-year starter at Cincinnati, Wiley was an F tight end, mostly boundary, and part of a rotation in former offensive coordinator Gino Guidugli's. Why are all the offensive coordinators so hard to pronounce today? Gino Guidugli's spread RPO offense. And there you go. Spread RPO offense is kind of a common theme so far that we've been hearing these Titans drafted guys from a college to NFL perspective. A Cincinnati native, he passed on SEC and Big Ten offers to play for the Bearcats, although he wasn't a focal point in the offense and never reached 400 receiving yards in a season. After playing at 230 pounds as an underclassman, Wiley sustained 250 plus pounds as a senior, and the improved ball strength and toughness showed in his blocking. Though he has outstanding speed and body control for his size, he doesn't break tackles, and his ball skills as a receiver are inconsistent. Only 62.7% of his targets in 2022 resulted in a reception. Overall, Wiley has a triangle number, height, weight, speed, and blocking upside that NFL teams are looking for, but he doesn't consistently play up to his testing numbers, and his receiving tape leaves much to be desired. With improved catch point skills, he has the traits to be a rosterable wide tight end in the NFL. He has a 5th round grade on him, which I believe is where the Titans, or no, 6th round is where the Titans took him. No, 5th round. So they took him in the 5th round, where he was graded by Dan Brugler and where we kind of had him. JT, we named him as a don't draft player in our draft guide, and there was one big reason for that. Do you have that pulled up, and can we read that?
So what I wrote about Josh Wiley is I said, Wiley is a great run blocker, posting a 69.5 PFF run blocking grade in 2022, but the pass catching ability is suspect. Wiley had a 28.6% contested catch rate, which is pretty poor amongst all tight ends this past season. And my point was the Titans do not need 2 Jeff Swains. And of course, everybody's coming at me on Twitter. Jeff Swaim's not on the team. Yeah, guys, I know Jeff Swaim's not on the team.
Okay,
the point is
another Jeff Swaim.
They don't need another Jeff Swaim. We have Trayvon Wasco and now Josh Wiley, 2 guys who are really good at pass blocking, but besides that, do not shine in the pass catching ability part of their game. And of course, with a tight end class that was chocked full of guys who are able to catch passes really well and be super productive, Josh Wiley is not my first pick. Now, of course, Josh Wiley showed up in our 3rd roundup of guys not to draft. So, of course, drafting him in the 5th, you could probably see it. Still, the big point that keeps coming up, Chig goes down. What are you going to do? I have my doubts about if Josh Wiley can step in and be a productive piece in the Titans passing offense, which we saw kind of take off with Austin Hooper being a very nice compliment to Chig. I don't know if Josh Wiley can be that compliment to Chig now.
And that's really the thing. We didn't dislike him as a player. The problem is we saw him more as a Trayvon Wesco, and they already have a Trayvon Wesco. So it was you're looking for a guy that can do it both. You need a tight end too that can be a receiving and blocking threat. I think pretty clearly the Titans see him as that, and they think that they can get more out of him as a receiver than was gotten out of him in college. And so it's one of those things where we disagree with the Titans' evaluation of him. Although maybe the idea here, JT, is we have 2 more Trayvon Wesco-y style glorified tight end, really glorified lineman guys that we can allow Chig to just, he's an undersized guy for a blocking tight end. Maybe this will just allow Chig to not have to worry about blocking at all. We can just use Chig as a glorified receiver. He can be our Travis Kelce, right? You can be our Dalton Kincaid, where he's somebody that we just use as a glorified tight end that is really a wide receiver 3 in our scheme. And we've got 2 solid blocking tight ends behind him. Maybe that's what they're going for. I don't know.
Maybe. And I would honestly be all for that. I mean, Chig quietly put up numbers that still nobody seems to talk about. He was one of the best rookie tight ends.
Free the prince that was promised, man. Let this boy eat.
And if that was going to happen, and now we're considering, okay, so the wide receiver room now adds Chig as a viable receiver that you see him get 7-8 targets, catches a game for maybe 60 yards and a score, then you're feeling a little bit better about their wide receiver situation right now.
Right. If the deal here is we needed 2 guys that could block so we can let Chig eat in the passing game, I'd take that deal.
I'll take that deal. Damn good deal.
Damn good deal. I take that deal. So I understand it from that perspective. But in general, if they're looking for a tight end 2 that can do both things, and that's what they think they can get out of him, more passing upside, I'm with you, JT. Gonna need to show me that one. I don't see that one, boss. Let's move on to our next question.
Yeah, we have 2 questions here with our 2 draft picks that are left to talk about here.
Last 2 questions. All right.
This one comes from @Levin and Brewer Fan 97 from they had their location services on. They had their location services on, and it comes right from around Nissan Stadium. So
that's weird.
It's a little suspect, but
is it coming from the locker room?
I don't know, but they say another tackle in the 6th round. What is there to like about Jalen Duncan? So I don't know if someone's worried out there that their jobs might be taken soon, but who knows,
What is there to like about Jalen Duncan? The answer is a lot. So let's go through Dane Brugler's draft guide here on Jalen Duncan, who he had as a 4th or 5th round grade, and the Titans got in the 6th. Of all the value picks in this draft, Duncan may be my favorite. because I think that the value on him is really, really, really high. How often do you see serviceable potential future starting tackles or really good swing tackles gotten in the 6th round? Typically, tackle production comes in rounds 1 and 2, and then to a lesser extent 3 and 4, and then it's a massive cliff. But here's the write-up on him. Strengths: impressive athletic gifts with a tall, moldable frame, from Dane Brugler's The Athletic Beast, by the way. Has the lateral foot quickness and patient handoff to cut off arc speed unstressed. Loose in his movements to quickly reset and respond versus spins and shakes. Flexible hips to adjust once he latches to prolong engagement. Improves understanding of blocking angles. Effective catch technique on kickouts. Mobile blocker to execute challenging move and reach blocks and various pulls. When he stays under control, he looks comfortable picking off and burying linebackers in space. A 4-year starter in college with 39 starts. Weaknesses: upright pass setter and struggles versus length and power. Wide, tardy hands, often giving up his chest and allowing rushers to bully him. Struggles to counter versus long arm techniques who attack his body. His balance and footwork fall apart when attempting to recover. His poor leverage negates any power. Below average fire into his blocks and not a drive finisher. Underwhelming strength in his hands and grip. Easily reaches the second level, but below average connect rate and has too many missed assignments in the run game. Finicky motor and doesn't always fight through the whistle. His compete levels fluctuate from snap to snap, lacking the finishing aggression coaches desire. From one NFL scout, quote, "You have to push him, keep him motivated." Flag magnet in college, drawing 20 penalties over his final 2 seasons in college. Was a left tackle only in college and doesn't have experience at any other positions. Suffers a concussion during the Senior Bowl this past February. Added 16 pounds between the combine and his pro day. In summary, a 4-year starter at Maryland, Duncan was a mainstay left tackle in head coach Mike Locksley's balanced offense and should be the first Maryland offensive lineman drafted since 2010. He became a starter as a redshirt freshman and showed improvement each season. However, his senior year fell short of expectations with 6 of his 7 sacks allowed, coming against the top opponents on the schedule: Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. Duncan has the big man athleticism to fluidly reach his landmarks in both pass protection and the run game, but his leverage, anchor, and mechanics fall apart quickly at contact and hurt his ability to sustain, especially against long-armed, powerful rushers who can turn him into a turnstile at times. He did show improvement in this area during his Senior Bowl practices. Overall, Duncan has desirable athletic tools, but the continued issues with his technique, balance, and competitive makeup, especially for a 4-year starter, are worrisome to some for his NFL transition. His projection may be best inside to guard in a zone-based scheme, again with a 4th or 5th round grade. Duncan's a guy that I was talking about before the draft as an option if the Titans ended up not going tackle in the 1st round, which they did according to some and didn't according to others. But if they needed a tackle later in the rounds, I wrote about 2 guys on Twitter, Jalen Duncan and Matthew Bergeron. Bergeron, by the way, who went early second. Clearly the NFL was as high on him as I was. But Duncan is the 3rd round. I wrote him out as the 3rd round version of Bergeron. That's why I'm shocked he was available in the 6th. Very athletic, versatile, better pass blocker than a run blocker. And an added note, he's a lineman that the Titans expressed a ton of interest in. Also using a top 30 visit on him. Won't be shocked if the Titans end up going with him. Had a 61.9 run block grade in college, which was above average. Even better than that is 67.4 pass block grade. So this is a guy that is someone who I think based on that evaluation, JT, we can kind of come to the conclusion he's got all the tools, he's got all the traits, he's got the build, he's got the athleticism. He's just between the ears, needs some work. He's maybe on the little immature side, maybe needs some competitive fire under his butt side. And from a technique standpoint, he's just got a lot of polish to add. Like he's just needs a lot of work. So he's a guy that in the 6th round, the Titans clearly said, "Hey, give us this guy. We'll develop him for a year or 2. And maybe in 2 years when our Andre Dillard moves on, we need a left tackle. He can be the guy if he's developed up. If we need a swing tackle, he can be that guy. If we need a guard in the next year or 2, he can be that guy." So he's a versatile backup option that I think just adds to their tool chest that they've not had for a while. Backup linemen who have some actual promise. I think Jalen Duncan fits that bill. A note from our guy, James Foster, by the way, over at No Flags Film on Twitter. Jalen Duncan versus Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State, which was brought up in the Dane Brugler piece about those were his worst games. In those 3 games, he had 133 pass block snaps, 17 pressures allowed, 6 sacks allowed, a 24.9 PFF blocking grade. Not great, Jim. But against every other opponent, 343 pass block snaps. So almost 3 times the number of snaps than those 3 games. On those triple the snaps, he allowed just 11 pressures and 1 sack with an elite 85.4 PFF blocking grade. So he's kind of like MPF coming out. Not the level of athlete, not the level of player or prospect yet, but in the sense that he excel. I mean, this is, I understand. I don't get why people think this is so shocking. Like, turns out when you play better opponents, it's harder to do well. Like, I get that you're looking for the Mahomes who step up in the big moments, the guys who are the stars in the brightest, under the brightest lights, and they really step up. Like, yeah, but those guys are hard to find. Typically, the average person, think about in your day-to-day job, if you're, if you work as a lawyer or as a doctor, like, turns out a kid comes in with strep throat, it's a lot easier to treat than when you get, some unknown disease that you've never heard of and is very difficult to treat and you don't know what you're doing. If you're a lawyer, it turns out it's a lot easier to prosecute a drunk driver that killed 6 kids than it is to defend a drunk driver that killed six kids. Like, there are, when things are harder in life, you do worse. That's typically the way that things go. So there were a lot of people that were like, oh, well, he's just bad against the better opponents, he's no good. Most players are bad against their better opponents. That's how it goes. So he's a guy that I'm sure the Titans hope they can coach up, can get working in a matter that they can use him as a backup and maybe a future starting tackle for this team. I love the value in the 6th round. With that, JT, let's get to our last question.
That was quite the metaphor there at the end there. Kind of caught me off guard.
I went as strong as possible to really get the point across.
Yeah.
If you understood what I meant, right?
Passive,
you got the point.
If you were passive listening, your ears shot up right there. That was a good one.
You're just typing. You're at work, and then you hear drunk driver kills 6 kids. That'll perk your ears up for sure.
The last one. This question comes from a real viewer, me. From an actual location, Nashville.
Submitted by JT Runke from Nashville.
Submitted by me. And the question goes, Colton Dowell. Who? That's it.
Who's this dude?
You know the reaction
from a lot of folks.
You know the Snoop Dogg gif of him at that on the radio? He goes, who?
Yeah,
that's me. That was me in the 7th round here.
I mean, that was me too. He was the only guy the Titans drafted who you and I had hand up. No idea who Colton Dowell is.
No idea.
Didn't know.
But they got
crash course myself on him recently.
But Failure, you were right. The Tennessee Titans did get a Tennessee boy.
I said all along, appropriately vaguely, they're going for a volunteer receiver, and dadgummit, they got a University of Tennessee receiver, just not a volunteer. So Colton Dowell in the 7th round, a guy that people did not have on their boards. Lance Zierlein, who's a very good evaluator, I saw a tweet from him just yesterday, I believe. He said, I have to write up every player who is drafted that I didn't have draft profiles on before. And I just finished Colton Dowell from University of Tennessee Martin. I kept saying UTC, didn't I? Just kidding. Even worse, UT Martin. Who? Sorry, UT Martin fans. Even smaller. Worse, not worse, just smaller. Who was taken by the Titans. Zierlein says he's got great size, ran well, tested with elite explosiveness, and was productive in college. Super pissed off that I missed out on him. Now, we don't have a Dane Brugler write-up on him. He was in Dane Brugler's guide, but he was in the best of the rest category without write-ups on him. We do have a write-up, however, from somebody who covers the Division II conference that he was in. And so this was the write-up on him. Strengths: adjust to the football really well. Good overall athleticism for a bigger bodied receiver, able to stack, track, and adjust to make the reception. Above average route runner who is good off the line of scrimmage, into his stem and out of his break. Everything is clear and consistent. A pro's pro in that regard. Excellent hands to make some of the tougher catches look routine. Proper hand technique as well. Can win low or above the rim. Need areas of improvement. Needs to be a bit more violent at the top of his route versus handsy defensive backs, lets them linger a bit too long out of his break, and it affects the end result. Not an overly elusive runner after the catch, tends to try to beat you with his speed or physicality and not get around you. He ended up giving him a 77 overall grade. His career accolades: 2023 College Gridiron Showcase, a 2-time first-team All-Ohio Valley Conference player, 2-time second-team All-Ohio Valley Conference player, UT Martin's all-time receiving leader in receptions. His career stats: 177 catches for almost 2,800 yards, 15.8 yards per catch, and 19 receptions. The games that they recommend you go watch. If you want to watch Volunteer versus UT Martin tape, this is the guy to watch. The Tennessee Volunteers played this guy this past season, and I believe he put up like 173 yards in that game, if I'm not mistaken. He went off like a double-digit receptions for 150-ish yards. Also, 2022 game against Boise State and Murray State are two games you should also watch. So this is a guy that's 6'2", 207, Colton Dowell. His testing numbers were great. There's a lot to like about him on paper. He's just somebody that, played in Division II, played in the Ohio Valley Conference. Don't know a ton about him. The odds are he'll be a practice squad player, but he's got the upside, I think, to become a diamond in the rough if you just get lucky. You're taking it's a dice roll in the 7th round. Everybody's a flyer. So they took a flyer on a guy that they need at a position of need that could have a. All right, JT, I think that's all our questions. Do you have anything more to add before we look through these comments here?
I was just going to say, when that pick did come through, it was pretty funny that we had one of the horsemen, Paul Baki, send us a little video
on campus.
Remember when he was on campus with, I guess, maybe one of this other sports teams or just with a group of
he was there watching
students.
his son, is a star baseball. He's a pitcher for, I forget the team, but yeah, he was there watching his son at UT Martin.
And he took a video of a couple of UT Martin students like, how do we feel about Colton Dowell? And they were like, yeah, love him.
Odds are they probably didn't know who he was talking about. I told Colton to go find some coaches, do some investigative research. Paul, he's going to get back to us on that.
Yeah. But that was fun. If anybody has some questions now, we'll take a couple questions. Here we have a couple to go
through.
Real
questions
with real answers. And it does have to do with Colton Dowell. And this also comes from horseman of the show, Paul Baki. He says, Easton and JT, I'd love to hear a hot read analysis comparing Colton Dowell and A.T. Perry. Seems if Perry was taken by the Titans in the 3rd, fans would have been happy. Similar body type to Dowell, similar athletic scores with Dowell actually being better. Perry drafted in the 6th. I wonder if Titans said they can pass on a wide receiver from rounds 3 to 6 and get a guy they felt was just as good as anybody who they saw and worked with in person, and obviously is a great guy and a team first guy in the 7th. If they are close in ability, I got to think it was smart to wait for the 7th.
Yeah, from a measurement standpoint and from an athletic standpoint, they're relatively similar. And he's a guy that in the late stages of round 5, 6, and then into 7, I forget where he ended up going. I think he went in the early 7th, A.T. Perry, maybe late 6th. But he was a guy that we were big fans of. I was big fans of. I loved the big body receiver. If the Titans wanted a late swing on a guy, I liked A.T. Perry a lot. He's 6'5", 205. Colton Dowell is 6'2", 207. So both big bodied guys. I don't have both of their athletic testing up here, but I know that they were both explosive and fast athletes. A.T. Perry, the thing with him for me was his footwork at his size is insane. He's a great route runner, great with his feet. Colton Dowell, from what I've heard and from what I've seen of the limited tape that I've seen so far, kind of the same profile, like a very shifty and explosive athlete for his size, which makes him a really good swing in the 7th round. So I think, Paul, you're not too far off there, JT. I mean, I think that's a pretty decent comp for him. And while Perry played against better opponents at Wake Forest, D1 guys, more experienced, more polished, at just the raw prospect, not that far off.
Yeah, I think the only difference I would say is that I just think A.T. Perry was a lot more NFL ready, which clearly a lot of the media did too, and the NFL just didn't. So, and that's why he may have fell so far as he did. But yeah, from the measurement standpoint, I think the big difference is just the competition that they faced. Our next question here that we have comes from Jacob Sane. He says, I know Carthen didn't intentionally draft all offense, but was there a specific moment in the draft where a defensive player was available that you really wanted?
The only thing that I can think of, JT, was in the 6th and 7th round. Ivan Pace Jr. out of Cincinnati is a linebacker who profiles like identically to David Long Jr., who the Titans just let go, but had a ton let go in free agency. That is, they didn't cut him or anything. They just didn't re-sign him because of the injuries. I thought that could be a very similar comp. And I thought David Long Jr. was a guy worth keeping around. If he was healthy all the time, I'm sure the Titans would have kept him around because he was a really good linebacker. And he was in today's NFL, you've got to have linebackers that can, turn around and get into coverage and not fall on their faces or get burned by these tight ends or slot receivers. Ivan Pace Jr. was that guy. So he's the one who I thought, and I think he ended up going before the Titans 7th round pick in the early 7th round. So, they didn't have him in the 7th round, but in the 6th round, if they hadn't taken Jalen Duncan, who I definitely like better than Ivan Pace Jr., I would have liked Ivan Pace Jr. Were there's any defenders in there that you're like, oh man, I really, really would have liked, a cornerback would have been nice at some point for sure.
Yeah, I think there was probably some decent value. The pick that they gave up to go get Will Levis, that ended up being Garrett Williams, the corner out of Syracuse, who
Right.
I kind of liked. He was on my top 10 board there for sure. Um, Not that I can really remember, it's just like there's so many picks. I think Yasir Abdullah was a guy who I think went right before they took Josh Wiley, that in the 5th round right there, I could have been like, I could see them taking Yasir Abdullah with where he was going. But besides that, um, definitely them going BPA with offense wasn't the worst thing to do in that draft. The
No,
next
I agree.
question we have here is from Stony over at the Sobros Network and says, how different does 2022 end with Skoronski at left tackle instead of Dennis Daly? Hope your brains are hungry because that's some food for thought.
I mean, I'm just like, hey Siri, give me some opposites. Like black and white, night and day, like it's hot and cold. That is what it's going to be with Skoronski and Dennis Daly. Skoronski and Dillard on the left side, no matter how poorly you think it could go, there just is no world in which it is anywhere close to how poorly it went with Aaron Brewer and with Dennis Daly. Good riddance to both on the left side. With Brewer, I've not sold all my Brewer stock. I think that he's going to be a better center than Titans. I mean, I've gotten a lot of pushback with talking about the Titans' new offensive line on Twitter today. Like, well, that's all great if they just gotten a real center. I think Aaron Brewer has the potential to be a really good center, and I think he could be a good guard too. Now, center is the position that makes most sense for him. He's undersized, but he is a very smart guy, understands the system, cerebral. You want that in a center. You also want a center that's athletic, and he's certainly a very athletic player, not too tall to be a center by any means, a very good pulling blocker. Like I talked about this with Mike Herndon on the Mike Herndon show when we did tape eval each week last season. If you've got a guy like Brewer who you can pull regularly and try to get to the second level, Brewer versus linebackers is a 100% success rate at all times. It is a cheat code to have him with his speed get to the second level so quickly and efficiently, make contact, and he's a $2 steak. That's how the Titans described him last season rather. This guy is as tough as a $2 steak. He is a monster, and at his size, he plays like he thinks he's 20 pounds heavier than he is. So while I think that there's a chance he's the weakest link on the Titans offensive line this year, I think that he's going to be significantly better at center, not just because that's his natural position, but listen, what's the last thing that an undersized guard needs? They need a tackle running mate who's a disaster, who's a turnstile. Like that, the number one thing, I think that if last season had gone differently and Taylor Lewan had played the whole year, I think Aaron Brewer may have been like their second or third best lineman. He would have had a much, much better year when they weren't having to make up for the deficiency of the tackle next to them.
Yeah, and then one final question, and if anybody else has any questions who is watching right now, feel free before we finish up these real question roundup after the last segment, and then we're going to get out of here.
Baby.
Last question I have here from Jordan Lowry, one of the horsemen. He says, can we hear about potential wideout and cornerbacks that could come out of waivers? I know those were our other two big needs, and while the draft didn't really address them, I'm to understand that waivers and trades could.
Yeah, so from a trade standpoint, everybody is available. Like the Titans could make some splash trade that we're not expecting. A Mike Evans, whose contract situation is kind of tenuous in Tampa Bay. That'd be a big splash. DeAndre Hopkins is still a guy in Arizona who they're still trying actively to get rid of. Now, whether you think it's a good or a bad idea to go and get that guy at his age and with his injury history is another question. But if he's healthy, like obviously a guy that's going to come in on day one, be wide receiver 1B to Treylon Burks and be a stud. You've got, like we mentioned earlier in the show, the Denver wide receiver room has a bunch of guys that are starters that they probably aren't going to be able to hang on to all of them and are probably going to be looking to trade somebody, if not just have to cut them eventually. And then the Jets are another team that come to mind as a team that has, last I checked, like let me pull up the RLads real quick for the Jets so I can quit talking about it as a abstract and we can actually put a name on. Okay, so here we go. The RLads and the rlads.com, weird name for a website, by the way, but if you're looking for off-season, most accurate, most up-to-date depth charts, it's the place you should go. On RLads, the wide receiver depth chart for the Jets right now is Garrett Wilson, Corey Davis, Alan Lazard, Denzel Mims. So they've got Mecole Hardman, Deontay Spencer, like that's at least five guys that would all be starters immediately on the Titans roster. And then they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 wide receivers behind those first five that you've never heard of. But like they can't keep 12 wide receivers on their roster. And they got 5 guys that would be a starter on the Titans team. So I think a trade or a cut situation there is absolutely in the cards. And there are options for this team to get better via trades, via cuts, via the waiver wire at wide receiver. Will they take those options? They said they were going to consider it. We will see.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add about that before we get out of here, cornerback's really interesting because surprisingly, the cornerback market is still, you kind of have some old veterans who probably, cornerbacks who could maybe make an impact. Of course, we know how injury riddled this cornerback and secondary group has been.
Yes.
So it might be interesting to keep an eye out and see as we get closer to camp, guys like Byron Jones, Marcus Peters, William Jackson, Shaquille Griffin, Eli Apple, Rock Ya-Sin, Trey Flowers, all these guys who have NFL experience who might be making their transition to more journeymen of the NFL here. And like what we saw last year for the Titans could be guys that we see pop up later.
Like a Jackrabbit Jenkins that the Titans fans will know from a couple of years ago. That's exactly the kind of guy that they would be considering if they were to add there. But yeah, I mean, their cornerback room right now on paper, if you tell me all those guys stay healthy, then they're good. But if you told me they all stay healthy, I'm going to say you're a liar. I don't believe you. That doesn't happen at that position, and especially not on this team. All right. Is that all the questions we got from folks?
That's all we have.
All we saw. All right. Awesome. Guys, 2-hour episode, which I kind of expected coming in, but this was easily the most information dense episode we've had in maybe the whole calendar year. So I'm sure you learned something new. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We'll be back on Friday. Don't know the topic of the show yet. I'll go ahead and tell you. These are the 2 things that I'm considering. I'm writing an article right now on 20 questions that I have for the 20 most interesting new rookies in the AFC South. And I'm probably going to talk about that on a show because there's a lot of good information there. And there's a lot of players around the AFC South that are going to be a significant part of Titans fans' lives sooner than they know. And I think a lot of these guys may be a bigger part in this first year than Titans fans expect. So a lot of different interesting players. I mean, can we just real quick, everybody's got to appreciate the fact we finally have an AFC South that's going to be fun again. That is awesome. I'm honestly amped for that. Yeah, the Colts had a really, really good draft, in my opinion. It bothers me how much Chris Ballard as a talent evaluator aligns with me as a talent evaluator because he just loves the big-bodied stud athletes, and he went and got like 4 or 5 guys that were my guys in this draft, so it stinks because he keeps drafting guys that I want to root for. And then, of course, the Texans had 10,000 draft picks, and the Jaguars kind of shrewd with their drafting this year, but had a couple of picks that I find most interesting. And then we've got, like I mentioned, Danny Kelly of The Ringer coming on the show. We're going to talk all things draft. Don't know when yet. Got to reach out to him again and see what's going on. But I'd say this week or next is when we'll probably get around to our conversation with Danny Kelly, and we'll talk about all the insanity that ensued on the 2023 NFL draft weekend this past weekend. So tune in Friday for whatever that episode is. It's going to be entertaining either way. Make sure to check out yesterday's episode to relive the first 3 picks. The live broadcast cut up is a very good, interesting episode from yesterday. You can go and check out. And with that, JT, I think we're done. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. 2 hours. Great participation today. Loved it. We'll be back on Friday. Until then, for producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. This has been the Hot Read Podcast.